Dark, ominous music swells, underscored by the howl of a winter wind. Narrator, in the snow-draped shadows of Gorston Hall, a Christmas feast hides a deadly secret. Hercule Poirot, the world's greatest detective, is summoned by the ruthless millionaire Simeon Lee to unravel a web of family betrayal. Why does Simeon taunt his sons with hints of a changed will? What darkness lurks behind the locked doors of his manor? When a blood-curdling scream pierces the festive night, a brutal murder unfolds, an impossible crime with no footprints in the snow. Can Poirot's little grey cells unmask a killer among the envious heirs, or will greed and vengeance bury the truth? Music crescendos dive into a chilling holiday mystery where every smile hides a motive, and no one is what they seem. Chapter 1. The Summons to Gorston Hall. The wind howled across the frostbitten fields of Shropshire, a banshee's wail that tore through the skeletal branches of ancient oaks and rattled the leaded windows of the Black Bull Inn. It was December 23rd, 1938, and the English countryside lay under a shroud of snow, as if the earth itself had donned a mourning veil for the season's festivities. Inside the inn, the fire in the hearth crackled with defiant warmth, casting flickering shadows across the oak-panelled walls. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective with a moustache as precise as a sculptor's chisel, sat in a habaked chair, his gloved hands folded neatly over the silver handle of his cane. His eyes, sharp and green as polished emeralds, surveyed the room with the quiet intensity of a man who missed nothing. Opposite him, Colonel Johnson, the local chief constable, puffed on a pipe, the aromatic smoke curling upward like a ghostly wisp. The two men had been friends for years, their acquaintance forged in the crucible of past investigations. Johnson, a ruddy-faced man with a penchant for blunt speech, had invited Poirot to spend Christmas at his modest country home, a respite from the detective's usual whirl of London cases. Yet, as Poirot sipped his tisana herbal concoction, he insisted upon, much to the innkeeper's bemusement, he sensed that fate had other plans. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice soft, yet resonant, "you assure me this is to be a quiet Christmas. No mysteries, no murders, no puzzles to disturb the little grey cells." Johnson chuckled, the sound as warm as the fire. "Hercule, I promise you a week of mince pies, carols, and perhaps a touch too much sherry. Shropshire's as peaceful as a vicar's sermon. You'll be bored stiff." Poirot's lips twitched beneath his moustache. Boredom, Colonel, is a state unknown to Hercule Poirot. The mind, it finds order where chaos reigns. He tapped his temple lightly, his eyes glinting with mischief. Their conversation was interrupted by the creak of the inn's heavy door. A young boy, no older than 12, bundled in a threadbare coat and scarf, stumbled in, his cheeks flushed from the cold. He clutched a letter, its wax seal glinting in the firelight. The innkeeper, a stout man with a perpetual scowl, pointed the boy toward Poirot's table. "Mr. Poirot, sir," the boy stammered, his breath visible in the chilly air that followed. "Him inside. Letter for you. From Gorston Hall," they said. "It's urgent." Poirot's eyebrows arched, a silent acknowledgement of the universe's penchant for irony. He took the letter, dismissing the boy with a nod and a shilling from his waistcoat pocket. The envelope was of fine vellum, the seal embossed with a lion's head, and the handwriting was bold, almost aggressive, as if the writer had pressed the pen into the paper with malicious intent. Poirot broke the seal and unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the contents with the precision of a watchmaker. Colonel Johnson leaned forward, his pipe forgotten. "Well, what's it say? Don't keep an old soldier in suspense." Poirot cleared his throat and read aloud, his accent lending a theatrical cadence to the words. "My dear Monsieur Poirot, you do not know me, but my name is Simeon Lee, of Gorston Hall. I am an old man, and my days are numbered, but I have one final act to play before I depart this stage. I invite you to join my family for Christmas at my estate. There are matters afoot, matters of the heart and the purse that require a mind such as yours. I am told you see what others do not. Come, and bring your friend, the good Colonel. I promise you a festive season unlike any other. Discretion, I trust, is your habit. Yours." Simeon Lee. Poirot folded the letter, his expression unreadable. He murmured, "This Monsieur Lee, he does not beg, he commands." And yet, there is a shadow behind his words, a hint of menace. Johnson frowned, tapping his pipe against the table. "Simeon Lee, the old devil himself. He's richer than Croesus, made his fortune in diamonds out in South Africa, a ruthless sort, by all accounts. Lives up at Gorston Hall, a monstrous pile of a place. Families a mess on, scattered like leaves. None of 'em on good terms with the old man. Why is he dragging you into it?" Poirot tilted his head, his fingers steepled. "That, mon ami, is the question. A man does not summon Hercule Poirot for mince pies and carols. No, there is a game afoot, and Simeon Lee wishes me to be a player." "Or a pawn," Johnson muttered, but his eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Will you go?" Poirot smiled, a small, enigmatic curve of his lips. "Mais oui. The little grey cells, they demand stimulation. And besides, it is Christmas. What better time to unravel the secrets of a family?" The journey to Gorston Hall was a study in contrasts. The snow-laden countryside sparkled under a weak winter sun, its beauty marred only by the biting wind that clawed at the windows of Colonel Johnson's motor car. Poirot, wrapped in a heavy overcoat and a scarf of impeccable silk, sat in the passenger seat, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the silhouette of Gorston Hall loomed like a Gothic spectre. The estate was a sprawling edifice of red brick and ivy, its turrets piercing the sky like accusatory fingers. The drive was lined with ancient yews, their branches heavy with snow, and the air carried the faint scent of pine and wood smoke as the car crunched to a halt on the gravel courtyard. The great oak doors of the hall swung open, revealing a butler, whose gaunt frame and solemn expression suggested he had been carved from the same wood as the panelling. "Mr. Poirot, Colonel Johnson," he intoned, his voice as dry as old parchment. "I am Tressilian, the butler. Mr. Lee is expecting you. Please, follow me." The interior of Gorston Hall was a monument to wealth and decay. The grand hall was adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes following Poirot as he crossed the marble floor. A massive chandelier glittered above, its crystals catching the light like frozen tears. A towering Christmas tree, bedecked with crimson ribbons and silver baubles, stood in one corner, its festive cheer at odds with the oppressive silence of the house. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and old secrets. Tressilian led them to a drawing-room where a fire roared in a cavernous hearth. The room was a study in opulence. Velvet drapes, mahogany furniture, and a Persian rug that could have funded a small village, yet there was a chill that no fire could dispel, a sense of unease that clung to the walls like damp dot. Waiting within were the inhabitants of Gorston Hall, a tableau of strained civility. Simeon Lee sat in a high-backed chair, his frail body swathed in a fur-lined robe. His face was a map of wrinkles, his eyes sharp and predatory, like a hawk's. His white hair was thinning, but his presence dominated the room. A king holding court over a reluctant kingdom. Around him stood his family, their expressions ranging from wary to openly hostile. Alfred Lee, the eldest son, was a man in his 40s, his face lined with the weariness of duty. His wife, Lydia, stood beside him, her delicate features masking a steel resolve. Harry Lee, the prodigal second son, lounged against a bookcase, his handsome face marred by a smirk that suggested he found life a perpetual jest. George Lee, the third son, was stout and pompous, his wife Magdalen clinging to his arm with the desperation of a social climber. David Lee, the youngest, had the haunted look of an artist, his eyes burning with unspoken grief. His wife, Hilda, radiated quiet strength, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Pilar Estravados, Simeon's granddaughter from his late daughter, was a vision of exotic beauty, her dark eyes flickering with curiosity and defiance. And finally, Stephen Farr, a tall, tanned man with the bearing of a colonial adventurer, stood, apart, his presence an enigma. Simeon's voice cut through the silence, rasping yet commanding. "Monsieur Poirot, Colonel Johnson, welcome to Gorston Hall. I trust the journey was not too arduous." Poirot bowed slightly, his eyes never leaving Simeon's. "It was most pleasant. Monsieur Lee, the countryside, it is charming, even in its winter garb, but I confess I am intrigued by your invitation. You speak of matters requiring my attention. May I know their nature?" Simeon chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. "All in good time, Monsieur Tonight, we dine, we celebrate the season. Tomorrow, I shall make an announcement that will stir the waters, shall we say. For now, let us enjoy the hospitality of my home." The family exchanged glances, their unease palpable. Alfred cleared his throat. "Father, perhaps you could give Monsieur Poirot a hint." We're all curious about your intentions." Simeon's eyes gleamed with malice. "Curious, Alfred, or anxious? You've always been so eager to please. Unlike your brother Harry, who prefers to take what he pleases." He gestured toward Harry, who grinned, unfazed. "Guilty as charged, old man," Harry said. Raising a glass of brandy, he'd helped himself, too. "But let's not bore our guests with family squabbles. Monsieur Poirot, tell me, do you play cards? A game of bridge might liven up this dreary evening." Poirot smiled politely. "I prefer games of the mind, Monsieur Harry. Cards, they are too predictable." Lydia intervened, her voice smooth as silk. "Monsieur Poirot, you must forgive our family's eccentricities. We're not accustomed to such distinguished company. Perhaps you'd like to see the gardens before dinner. They're quite lovely, even under snow." Before Poirot could respond, Pilar spoke, her Spanish accent lending her words a musical lilt. "Grandfather, why have you brought this detective here? Are we to be interrogated like criminals?" Her dark eyes flashed, challenging Simeon directly. The old man's laughter was a harsh bark. "Pilar, my dear, you've inherited your mother's fire. But rest assured, Monsieur Poirot is here to observe, not accuse, yet." He leaned forward, his gaze sweeping the room. "You all have secrets, don't you? And I know them all." The room fell silent, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Colonel Johnson shifted uncomfortably, sensing the undercurrent of hostility. Poirot, however, remained serene, his eyes darting from face to face, cataloguing every twitch, every glance. Dinner was announced, and the family moved to the dining room, a cavernous space dominated by a long table, set with silver and crystal. The meal was a feast of roast goose, plum pudding, and mulled wine, but the conversation was stilted, punctuated by Simeon's barbed remarks. He spoke of his days in South Africa, of diamonds mined from the earth's heart, of betrayals and triumphs. Each anecdote seemed designed to needle his sons, to remind them of their dependence on his wealth. As the evening wore on, Poirot observed the dynamics: Alfred's strained deference, Harry's reckless bravado, George's pompous indignation, David's brooding silence. Lydia and Hilda tried to steer the conversation to neutral ground, but Simeon's presence was a storm cloud, casting shadows over their efforts. Pilar's bold questions and Stephen's quiet watchfulness added layers of intrigue. The servants, led by Tressilian, moved with practiced efficiency, but Poirot noted their unease, as if they too sensed the gathering storm. After dinner, the family retired to the drawing-room for coffee and carols, but the festive spirit was forced. David played a melancholic tune on the piano, while Magdalen attempted a shrill rendition of Silent Night. Simeon, seated by the fire, watched with a predatory grin, as if savouring the discord he had sown. As the clock struck 10, Simeon rose, leaning heavily on his cane. "I grow weary," he announced. "Monsieur Poirot, Colonel Johnson, I bid you good night. Tomorrow we shall have much to discuss. Tressilian, show our guests to their rooms." Poirot and Johnson were led to guest chambers on the second floor, their windows overlooking the snow-covered grounds. As Poirot prepared for bed, he stood by the window, gazing at the moonlit landscape. The hall was silent, but the silence was heavy, pregnant with unspoken truths. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Johnson, who lingered in the doorway. "This house, it is a stage, and we are but players in Simeon Lee's drama. But what is the play? A comedy, a tragedy, or something far darker?" Johnson shook his head. "You're seeing mysteries where there are none. Hercule, it's just a dysfunctional family with too much money and not enough sense." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Perhaps, but the little grey cells, they whisper otherwise. Tomorrow, I think, the curtain rises." As Johnson retired, Poirot sat at the small desk in his room. The letter from Simeon Lee opened before him. He read it again, his fingers tracing the words. The invitation was a summons, yes, but also a challenge. Simeon Lee was playing a game, and Poirot was determined to understand the rules before the first move was made. Chapter 2. The Patriarch's Provocation. The grand drawing-room of Gorston Hall glowed with the flickering warmth of a roaring fire, its amber light casting long shadows across the polished mahogany paneling. Outside, the snow fell in relentless sheets, muffling the world beyond the leaded windows, as if the estate were cocooned in a frozen, silent void. Within, however, the air crackled with a different kind of chill, one born not of winter but of human resentment, suspicion, and unspoken fears. Hercule Poirot, seated in a high-backed armchair near the hearth, observed the scene with the keen precision of a watchmaker studying a delicate mechanism. His small, fastidious hands rested lightly on the arms of the chair, his dark eyes darting from face to face, cataloguing every gesture, every fleeting expression. The room was a study in opulence, its heavy velvet drapes the color of claret, its walls adorned with ancestral portraits whose stern gazes seemed to judge the living. A towering Christmas tree stood in one corner, its branches laden with glass baubles and silver tinsel, yet its festive cheer felt hollow, a mere prop in a drama poised to unfold. At the center of it all sat Simeon Lee, the patriarch of Gorston Hall, ensconced in a carved oak chair that resembled a throne. His frail body, hunched beneath a tartan blanket, belied the sharpness of his eyes, 2 glittering beads that missed nothing. His thin lips curled into a smile that was less mirthful than predatory, as though he relished the discomfort his presence inflicted. Around him, his family stood or sat in a loose semicircle, their postures rigid with the weight of obligation. Alfred Lee, the eldest son, perched on the edge of a settee, his hands clasped tightly, his face a mask of dutiful restraint. His wife Lydia sat beside him, her delicate features serene but her eyes watchful, as if braced for an unseen blow. Harry Lee, the prodigal's second son, lounged against a bookcase, his broad shoulders and rakish grin at odds with the tension in his jaw. George Lee, the third son, stood near the window, his plump fingers fidgeting with a gold watch chain, his politician's smile strained. His wife Magdalen hovered nearby, her youthful beauty overshadowed by a nervous glance toward her husband. David Lee, the youngest son, sat at the piano, his fingers resting on the keys without playing, his dark eyes fixed on some distant memory. His wife, Hilda, stood protectively behind him, her sturdy frame a quiet bulwark against the rooms. Uniase Pilar Estrabados, Simeon's granddaughter, was a striking contrast to the others. Her dark hair and olive skin spoke of her Spanish heritage, and her presence seemed to draw the light, her bold gaze meeting Simeon's with an almost defiant curiosity. Beside her stood Stephen Farr, the outsider, his lean frame and weathered face marking him as a man who had seen the world beyond Gorston Hall's gilded cage. His eyes, however, held a guarded intensity, as if he, too, sensed the storm brewing. Simeon's voice, raspy yet commanding, cut through the room like a blade. "Well, here we all are, gathered for the festive season, as is proper for a family such as ours. Is it not a fine thing to be united under one roof?" His tone dripped with mockery, and he paused, letting the words hang like a challenge. Alfred cleared his throat, his voice measured. "Of course, Father, it's good to have everyone together. A rare occasion." "Rare indeed," Simeon said, his smile widening. "And how touching, Alfred, that you should think so. Always the loyal son, aren't you? Ever at my side, tending to my whims, while your brothers scattered to the winds." Alfred's cheeks flushed, but he held his tongue. Lydia's hand rested lightly on his arm, a silent gesture of support. Harry, however, laughed a sharp, reckless sound. "Oh, come now, Father, you've never been one for sentiment. Let's not pretend this is some cozy family reunion. You've got something up your sleeve, haven't you?" Simeon's eyes gleamed. "Perceptive, Harry, always the rogue, but never a fool. Yes, I have a purpose in bringing you all here. A grand announcement, you might say, but first." He leaned forward, his gnarled hands gripping the arms of his chair. "Let us speak plainly. You are all here because of me, because of my money, my name, my legacy. Isn't that so?" The room fell silent, the crackle of the fire the only sound. George shifted uncomfortably, his fingers pausing on his watch chain. "Father, that's hardly fair. We're here because it's Christmas, because we're family." "Family," Simeon barked, the word a lash, a fine word, George, but it rings hollow. "You, with your parliamentary heirs and your endless debts. Do you think I don't know how you've squandered my money on your campaigns and your mistress's jewels?" George's face reddened, and Magdalen gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. "Father, George began, but Simeon cut him off. "And you, David," Simeon continued, turning his gaze to the youngest son. "You sit there, brooding over your paints and your grudges, as if I'm the monster who ruined your life. Your mother's death was a tragedy, yes, but you've let it fester into an excuse for your failures." David's hands clenched on the piano keys, producing a discordant note. Hilda stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "That's enough, Simeon. David's made his own way, despite everything." Simeon chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound. "Oh, Hilda, ever the defender. And what of you, Harry, the prodigal son, returned at last to claim his share? Tell me, how many gambling dens and brothels have you funded with my gold?" Harry's grin faltered, but he recovered quickly, leaning forward with a glint in his eye. "You've always enjoyed your games, father. If I'm a wastrel, it's because I learned from the best. You've never been shy about throwing your weight around, have you?" Poirot's gaze flicked to Harry, noting the defiance beneath the bravado. The room was a powder keg, and Simeon was striking matches with gleeful abandon. "And then there's Pilar," Simeon said, his voice softening but no less dangerous. "My exotic little granddaughter, come all the way from Spain. You think you're here for love, don't you? But you're as much a part of this game as the rest. My blood runs in your veins, and with it, my fortune." Pilar tilted her head, her dark eyes narrowing. "I am not here for your money, abuelo. I came to know you, to understand why my mother spoke of you with such mixed feelings." Simeon's smile twisted. "Mixed feelings? How diplomatic. Your mother was a fool to leave, but you have spirit. I like that. Perhaps you're the only one here worth a damn." The words landed like a slap, and the family bristled. Alfred's jaw tightened, and Lydia's serene mask slipped, revealing a flash of indignation. George muttered something under his breath, while Magdalen clutched her pearls. David's fingers pressed harder on the keys, producing another jarring note. Stephen Farr, who had remained silent, finally spoke, his voice calm but edged with steel. "And what of me, Mr. Lee? You invited me here, the son of your old partner. What's my place in this charade?" Simeon's eyes locked onto Stephen's, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. "Your father was a weak man, Stephen, a dreamer who thought he could outsmart me. You're here because I choose to allow it, because I want to see if you're made of sterner stuff." Stephen's expression remained impassive, but Poirot noted the slight tightening of his fists. There was history here, a wound that had not healed. Simeon leaned back, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You all think you know me. You think you know what I'm capable of, but you don't. I've built an empire, and empires are not won by sentiment. They're won by strength, by cunning. And I'm not done yet." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "Tomorrow, I intend to make some changes. Changes to my will. Changes that will shake things up." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Alfred's face paled, and Lydia's hand tightened on his arm. Harry's grin vanished, replaced by a wary frown. George's fingers froze on his watch chain, and Magdalene's eyes darted to her husband, searching for reassurance. David's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with a mix of anger and fear. Hilda's hand rested on his shoulder, steadying him. Pilar's expression remained unreadable, but her fingers toyed with a bracelet, a nervous tick. Stephen's gaze never left Simeon, his silence more telling than words. "What kind of changes?" George asked, his voice tight. Simeon's smile was pure malice. "Oh, you'll see, George, you'll all see. Let's just say that some of you may find yourselves less comfortable than you're accustomed to." The fire crackled, a log collapsing into embers, and the room seemed to grow colder, despite the blaze. Poirot, silent until now, leaned forward slightly, his voice soft but clear. "Monsieur Lee, if I may, you speak of changes, of shaking things up, but such actions, they can provoke strong reactions. Are you certain this is wise?" Simeon's eyes met Poirot's, and for a moment there was a flicker of something respect, perhaps, or amusement. "Wise, Mr. Poirot, wisdom is for the timid. I've never been timid, and I'm not afraid of their reactions." He gestured to his family, his voice dripping with contempt. "Let them squirm, let them plot. It's what makes this game so entertaining." The word game sent a shiver through the room. Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of his growing unease. This was no mere family squabble. Simeon Lee was orchestrating something darker, something designed to provoke, to wound, to destroy. Lydia spoke, her voice calm but laced with steel. "Father, this is hardly the spirit of Christmas. We're here to celebrate, to come together. Why must you stir up trouble?" Simeon's laugh was a harsh bark. "Celebrate? You think I care for your tinsel and carols? I brought you here to face the truth. You're all vultures, circling my fortune. waiting for me to die. Well, I'm not dead yet, and I'll decide who gets what and who gets nothing. The room erupted into chaos. George sputtered, "This is outrageous." Harry slammed his fist against the bookcase, rattling the shelves. David stood, his face white with fury, and Hilda pulled him back, whispering urgently. Magdalene's eyes filled with tears, and she clutched George's arm. Pilar's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile, as if she found the spectacle intriguing. Stephen remained still, his eyes fixed on Simeon, a storm brewing behind his calm facade. Alfred rose, his voice trembling but resolute. "Father, enough. You've made your point. We're here, as you asked. Can we not have one evening of peace?" Simeon's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Peace, Alfred. You've always been the peacemaker. Very well, let's have our Christmas. Cheer, but know this. Tomorrow, everything changes." He clapped his hands, and the butler, Tressilian, appeared as if summoned by magic. "Serve the wine," Simeon ordered. "Let's drink to family, to legacy, to surprises." Tressilian moved silently, pouring ruby-red wine into crystal goblets. The family accepted their glasses with varying degrees of reluctance, their eyes darting between Simeon and one another. Poirot took his glass but did not drink, his mind already turning, analyzing, dissecting the scene before him. As the family sipped their wine, Simeon raised his glass, his voice a low growl, to Gorston Hall, to the Lee name, and to the future whatever it may hold. The toast was met with silence, the clink of glasses hollow and forced. Poirot watched as Simeon drained his glass, his eyes never leaving his family. The patriarch was playing a dangerous game, and Poirot sensed that the stakes were higher than anyone realized. The evening wore on. The conversation stilted and strained. Simeon retired early, claiming fatigue, but his parting words lingered like a curse. "Sleep well, my dears. Tomorrow will be illuminating." As the family dispersed, Poirot remained by the fire, his mind a whirl of observations. Alfred and Lydia retreated to the library, their whispers urgent. Harry lingered by the bookcase, his eyes following Pilar as she glided toward the staircase. George and Magdalene huddled in a corner, their voices low and anxious. David and Hilda slipped away, their silence heavy with unspoken pain. Stephen stood alone by the window, staring into the snow, his thoughts unreadable. Poirot rose, smoothing his mustache. The patriarch's provocation had done its work, sowing discord and distrust. Each family member carried a motive, a grudge, a secret. Simeon Lee had lit a fuse, and Poirot knew it was only a matter of time before it exploded. He stepped into the hall, where Tressilian was extinguishing the candles. "Monsieur Tressilian," Poirot said softly, "this is a house of many tensions, is it not?" The butler paused, his face impassive. "It's not my place to say, sir, but Mr. Lee has always had a way of stirring things up." Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Indeed, and I suspect, before this Christmas is over, we shall see just how far those stirrings go." As he ascended the grand staircase, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Gorston Hall was a stage, and Simeon Lee was its director, orchestrating a drama of greed, betrayal, and vengeance. Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, piecing together the puzzle, sensing that the patriarch's provocation was only the beginning. Chapter 3. The Shatter of Christmas Eve. The snow fell in relentless sheets outside Gorston Hall, cloaking the sprawling estate in a deceptive serenity. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of pine from the towering Christmas tree in the grand hall, its baubles glinting under the chandelier's golden glow. The festive cheer, however, was a fragile veneer, stretched taut over a household bristling with unspoken grudges. Hercule Poirot, seated at the long mahogany dining table, observed the Lee family with his characteristic precision, his small, neat hands folded before him, his dark eyes darting from face to face like a hawk assessing its prey. The dining room was a study in opulence, crimson wallpaper embossed with gold, heavy velvet drapes framing frosted windows, and a fire roaring in the massive hearth, casting flickering shadows across the faces of Simeon Lee's kin. Simeon himself was absent, having declared he would take his meal in his room, a decision that seemed to both relieve and unsettle the gathered company. Alfred, the eldest son, sat rigidly at the table's head, his thin lips pressed into a line as he cut his roast pheasant with surgical precision. His wife Lydia toyed with her wineglass, her delicate features betraying a flicker of unease. Harry, the prodigal's second son, sprawled in his chair, his loud laughter punctuating the otherwise stilted conversation. George, the pompous politician, droned on about parliamentary affairs to his mousy wife, Magdalene, who nodded absently, her eyes fixed on her plate. David, the youngest son, sat apart, his artist's hands restless, his gaze haunted as he stared into the fire. Pilar Estravados, Simeon's exotic granddaughter, radiated a quiet defiance, her dark eyes gleaming as she listened to the banter with a faint, enigmatic smile. Stephen Farr, the outsider, sat at the table's far end, his rugged South African features unreadable, though his fingers drummed lightly on the tablecloth. Poirot, ever the observer, noted the undercurrents of tension. The family had spent the afternoon in the drawing room, where Simeon's taunts about his will had left them raw and mistrustful. Now, as the servants glided silently, serving syllabub and spiced mulled wine, the conversation veered from forced pleasantries to barbed remarks. Harry, emboldened by his third glass of claret, leaned toward Alfred. "So, brother, still polishing father's boots, are you? Hoping for a bigger slice of the pie when he finally keels over?" Alfred's fork paused mid-air, his knuckles whitening. "Unlike some, Harry, I've stayed to manage the estate. Loyalty has its rewards." "Loyalty," Harry snorted, his voice carrying a mocking edge, "more like servitude. You're as much a prisoner here as that old vulture upstairs." Lydia's hand tightened on her glass, her voice soft but sharp. "That's enough, Harry. This is Christmas Eve, not a tavern brawl." Harry grinned, unrepentant, just keeping things lively. "Lydia, heaven knows this mausoleum needs it." George cleared his throat, his jowls quivering as he attempted to steer the conversation. "Speaking of the estate, I've been considering investments in the new railway expansion. Father's fortune could what?" "George," David interrupted, his voice low and bitter. "Line your pockets while you play the dutiful MP. Father's money has always been a curse, not a blessing." Pilar's laughter, light and musical, cut through the tension. "You all speak of money as if it's the only thing that matters. In Spain, we value family, not fortunes." Magdalene, usually silent, surprised everyone by speaking up, her voice tremulous. "Family. This family is a nest of vipers, waiting for Simeon to die so they can tear each other apart." A stunned silence followed, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Poirot's mustache twitched as he filed away Magdalene's unexpected candor. Stephen Farr, who had been quiet, leaned forward, his voice calm but probing. "And what about you, Mrs. Lee? What do you hope to gain from this Christmas reunion?" Magdalene flushed, her hands twisting her napkin. I only want peace. For George. For all of us." Before anyone could respond, a sound shattered the fragile deafening crash, like a table being overturned, followed by a scream so raw and guttural it seemed to claw at the walls. The dining room froze, forks clattering to plates, eyes wide with shock. The scream came again, a horrible, choking wail, unmistakably from Simeon Lee's room on the upper floor. Alfred was the first to move, his chair scraping as he stood. "Father," he barked, already striding toward the door. The others followed, a chaotic procession of footsteps, thundering up the grand staircase. Poirot, with his measured gait, trailed behind, his mind already racing, cataloguing the scene. The time just past 8 o'clock, the faces pale, some fearful, others calculating, and the scream itself, not just pain, but something deep. Perhaps they reached Simeon's door, a heavy oak barrier carved with intricate vines. Alfred pounded on it, shouting, "Father, father, are you all right?" No response came, only an eerie silence that seemed to mock their urgency. Harry, impatient, tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked," he growled, throwing his shoulder against the door. It held firm. "Step aside," Stephen said, his voice steady. With a powerful kick, he splintered the lock, and the door swung inward, revealing a scene of chaos. The room was a battlefield. A heavy oak table lay on its side, its legs splintered. A chair was smashed against the fireplace, and papers were strewn across the floor like fallen leaves. In the center, sprawled across a crimson Persian rug, lay Simeon Lee, his throat slashed, a grotesque wound gaping like a second mouth. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the rug, its edges creeping toward the upturned furniture. His eyes, wide and glassy, stared at the ceiling, frozen in a final moment of shock. Lydia gasped, clutching Alfred's arm. Magdalene stifled a sob, while George muttered, "Good God, it's murder." David stood rooted, his face ashen, his hands trembling. Pilar's eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable, while Harry cursed under his breath, his bravado gone. Stephen alone seemed composed, though his jaw tightened as he surveyed the scene. Poirot stepped forward, his small frame commanding despite the horror. "Do not touch anything," he said sharply, his Belgian accent crisp. "We must preserve the scene." He knelt beside Simeon, his gloved hands hovering over the body, noting the precision of the wound, a single, deep cut, no hesitation. The blood was still warm. The murder recent. He glanced at the windows, their heavy curtains drawn, the sills dusted with undisturbed snow. No footprints marred the snow outside, visible through a slight gap in the curtains. The room, he confirmed, was locked from the inside when they arrived. Tressilian, the butler, appeared at the door, his face pale. "I heard the scream, sir," he stammered. "I was in the pantry, but I came as quick as I could." Poirot nodded, his eyes scanning the room. The fireplace glowed faintly, its embers casting a dim light on the devastation. A small, glinting object caught his attention near Simeon's hand, a rough-cut diamond, no larger than a pea, its facets catching the firelight. He made no move to touch it, but his mind noted its incongruity in the scene. Superintendent Sugden, who had been dining with the local magistrate and was staying nearby, was summoned by a breathless footman. He arrived within the hour, his burly frame filling the doorway. "Poirot," he said, his voice gruff but respectful. "What's this mess, then? Old Lee's done for." "Indeed, mon ami," Poirot replied, rising. "A murder most foul, and in a room locked from within. The puzzle is intriguing, is it not?" Sugden surveyed the scene, his eyes narrowing at the overturned furniture. "Looks like a struggle. But that door was bolted, and the windows are sealed. How the devil did the killer get out?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "That, superintendent, is the question. But observe, the absence of footprints in the snow, the locked door, the single wound. This is no ordinary crime. The killer wished us to believe in an impossibility." The family, now gathered in the corridor, whispered among themselves, their faces a tableau of shock, fear, and suspicion. Lydia's voice trembled as she spoke to Alfred. "Who could have done this? He was alone, wasn't he?" "Was he?" Harry muttered, his eyes darting to Stephen. "Plenty of people had reason to want the old man dead." "Enough," Sugden barked. "Nobody leaves this house until we've got answers. Poirot, what's your take?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. "My take, superintendent, is that we stand at the edge of a labyrinth. The scream, the crash, the locked room, these are not accidents, but pieces of a deliberate design. We must unravel the how before we can name the who." He turned to the family, his voice calm but commanding. "Return to the drawing room. I will speak with each of you in turn. The truth, mise Amos, lies in the details, and Hercule Poirot will find it." As the family shuffled away, their footsteps heavy with dread, Poirot lingered in the room, his gaze sweeping over the blood, the diamond, the chaos. The scream still echoed in his mind, not just a cry of pain, but a signal, a message from the killer. This was no crime of passion, but a performance, staged with meticulous care. The chapter of Simeon Lee's life had ended in blood, but the story of his murder was just beginning, and Poirot, with his little grey cells, was determined to write its conclusion. The fire crackled, the snow fell, and the manor held its breath, as if waiting for the next act in this deadly Christmas drama. Chapter 4. Shadows of Suspicions. The snow fell in relentless curtains beyond the tall, frosted windows of Gorston Hall, muffling the world outside in a silent, suffocating embrace. Inside, the air was heavy with the aftershock of Simeon Lee's brutal murder. The opulent dining room, where just hours ago the family had sat in uneasy festivity, now felt like a mausoleum. Its long mahogany table, abandoned save for a scattering of untouched crystal goblets and a half-eaten platter of roast pheasant. The fire in the hearth crackled feebly, as if reluctant to warm a house so steeped in suspicion. Hercule, his small frame immaculate in a tailored overcoat, stood at the room's threshold, his sharp eyes scanning the faces of the assembled household. Each person, from the haughty Alfred to the enigmatic Pilar, seemed to wear a mask, their expressions a blend of grief, fear, and guarded calculation. The murder of Simeon Lee, discovered in his locked room with his throat slashed, and the furniture, in chaos, had shattered the fragile veneer of Christmas cheer. Superintendent Sugden, a burly man with a face like weathered granite, paced near the fireplace, his boots thudding against the polished floor. "A devil of a case, Poirot," he muttered, his voice low, but carrying in the still room. "A locked room, no footprints in the snow, and a house full of people with reasons to want the old man dead. Where do we even start?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle signal of his mind's relentless churn. "We start, mon ami, with the people. The heart of a crime lies not in the locked door, but in the desires that turn a key to murder." He turned to the family, who sat or stood in a loose semicircle, their postures rigid with unease. "I will speak with each of you, one by one. The truth, it hides in the shadows of your words, and I, Hercule Poirot, will find it." The interviews began in the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound tomes and dominated by a massive oak desk. The fire here burned brighter, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls, like spectres of the house's secrets. Poirot settled into a high-backed chair, his notebook open, his fountain pen poised. Superintendent Sugden stood by the door, arms crossed, his presence a silent reminder of authority. First came Alfred Lee, the eldest son, whose loyalty to his father had been a point of pride and burden. He entered with the stiff gait of a man accustomed to duty, his thin lips pressed into a line. His graying hair was neatly combed, but his eyes betrayed a sleepless night, red-rimmed and wary. "I don't know what you expect me to say, Monsieur Poirot," he began, sitting opposite the detective. "I was in this very room when it happened, reading, alone." Poirot tilted his head, his gaze piercing. "Alone, you say? And what, pray, were you reading, Monsieur Alfred?" Alfred hesitated, his fingers tightening on the armrests. "A book of accounts. Father insisted I reviewed the estate's finances. He was particular about such things." "Particular," Poirot echoed, his tone deceptively mild. "And did these accounts, perhaps, reveal anything that might disturb the harmony of this festive gathering?" Alfred's jaw tightened. "Father's fortune is vast, but his methods were unorthodox. He liked to keep us guessing about his plans for it. I didn't question him. I never did." Poirot made a small note, his pen scratching softly. "And yet, last night, your father spoke of altering his will. Did this not cause you concern, Monsieur Alfred, you who have devoted your life to his service?" Alfred's face flushed, but his voice remained steady. "I trusted father's judgment. If he wanted to change his will, that was his right. I had no reason to harm him." Poirot nodded, dismissing Alfred with a wave. "Mercy, that will be all for now." But as Alfred rose, Poirot's eyes lingered on the man's retreating figure, noting the slight tremor in his hands. "Loyalty," he mused, "could be a chain as heavy as greed." Next came Harry Lee, the prodigal son, whose rakish charm and weathered good looks seemed at odds with the somber mood. He sprawled in the chair, one leg crossed over the other, a cigarette dangling from his fingers. "I suppose you think I did it," he said with a wry smile. The ne'er-do-well's son, back to claim his share. "Well, I was outside when it happened, Poirot, in the garden, smoking. Fresh air, you know, clears the head after father's little performance." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "A performance, you say? And what did you make of this theatrical display of your father's?" Harry exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes narrowing. "He was baiting us, as always. Loved to see us squirm. Said he was rethinking the will, dangling the money like a carrot. I didn't care much. I've made my own way, more or less. And yet," Poirot said, leaning forward, "you returned to Gorston Hall. For Christmas, perhaps, or for something more substantial." Harry's smile faded. "I came because he asked. First time in years he reached out. Thought maybe he'd softened. Guess I was wrong." He stubbed out his cigarette, his movements sharp. "I didn't kill him, if that's what you're getting at." Poirot made another note, his expression unreadable. "The garden, you say? A curious place to be on a winter's night. Nan, the snow, it was falling heavily." Harry shrugged. "I'm used to worse. Spent winters in worse places than this." As Harry left, Poirot tapped his pen against his notebook. The garden. No footprints in the snow outside Simeon's window, but the garden was a maze of hedges and paths, some sheltered by overhangs, a possibility, perhaps, but one that required verification. George Lee, the third son, entered next. his rotund frame filling the doorway. His politician's smile was forced, his eyes darting to Sugden as if seeking an ally. "This is a terrible business, Monsieur Poirot," he said, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "I was with my wife Magdalene in our room. We heard the scream, of course, but we were nowhere near father's study." Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "And your wife, she will confirm this." "We, of course," George snapped, then softened. "We were discussing the Christmas arrangements. Magdalene's particular about such things." "Particular," Poirot repeated, his tone carrying a faint edge of irony. "And your father's announcement about his will, did it not trouble you, Monsieur George, a man of considerable expenses?" George bristled. "I'm a member of Parliament, Monsieur Poirot. My finances are my own concern. Father's money was his to do with as he pleased." Poirot's smile was thin. "And yet, the prospect of losing it must have been unsettling." George's handkerchief paused mid-dab. "I didn't kill him. I wouldn't. It's absurd." As George departed, Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. Greed, he thought, was a motive as old as time. And George's polished exterior hid a man stretched thin by ambition. David Lee, the youngest son, entered with a scowl, his artist's hands stained with faint traces of paint. His dark eyes burned with a quiet intensity. "I was playing the piano in the drawing room," he said without preamble. "I didn't hear anything until the scream. I loved my father, despite everything. I wouldn't hurt him." Poirot's head tilted. "Despite everything, you say? What weight do these words carry, Monsieur David?" David's hands clenched. "Father was difficult. He hurt mother years ago, broke her heart. I never forgave him for that. But murder? No, that's not me." Poirot's pen paused. "And yet, resentment, it can fester, Nan. It can drive a man to acts he might not otherwise consider." David's gaze met Poirot's unflinching. "I'm not that man." As David left, Poirot's mind churned. Resentment was a slow poison, and David's pain was raw, unhealed. But was it enough to kill? Pilar Estravados, Simeon's granddaughter, entered next, her dark eyes bright with a mix of defiance and curiosity. Her Spanish accent lent her words a lilting cadence, but there was steel beneath her charm. "I was in my room, Monsieur Poirot," she said, perching on the edge of the chair. "I heard nothing until the scream. I ran to grandfather's room with the others." Poirot studied her, noting the elegance of her movements, the way her fingers toyed with the silver bracelet. "You are new to this family, Mademoiselle Pilar, and yet, your grandfather, he seemed fond of you. Did he share with you any confidences, perhaps about his plans?" Pilar's lips curved in a faint smile. "Grandfather liked to talk. He said I reminded him of his youth, of adventure. He spoke of diamonds, of his time in Africa, but nothing about his will, if that's what you mean." "Diamonds," Poirot murmured, his eyes narrowing. "And did he show you such treasures?" Pilar shook her head. "Only stories. He said they were his past, locked away." Poirot made a note, his mind catching on the word locked. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful." As Pilar left, Poirot's gaze lingered on the doorway. Her youth and charm were disarming, but was there calculation behind those dark eyes? Stephen Farr, the outsider, was the last to enter. His lean frame and weathered face spoke of a life spent far from the comforts of Gorston Hall. He sat with a quiet confidence, his eyes meeting Poirot's without hesitation. "I was near the servants' quarters," he said, "talking to one of the maids. She'll confirm it. I heard the scream and came running." Poirot's moustache twitched. The servants' quarters, Monsieur Farr, a curious place for the son of Simeon Lee's old partner to linger. Stephen's smile was tight. "I'm not one of them, Poirot. Never will be. I was just passing the time. Didn't expect to be caught up in a murder." "And your father's partnership with Simeon Lee," Poirot said, his voice soft but probing. "It ended badly. Nan, did this not give you reason to resent your host?" Stephen's jaw tightened. "My father lost everything because of Simeon, but I didn't come here to settle old scores. I came because he invited me, said he wanted to make things right." "And did you believe him?" Poirot asked, his eyes gleaming. Stephen hesitated, then shook his head. "No, Simeon Lee didn't do anything without a reason. But I didn't kill him." As Stephen left, Poirot leaned back, his mind a whirlwind of impressions. Each alibi was plausible, yet each carried the weight of hidden truths. He rose, crossing to the window where the snow continued its relentless descent. The locked room, the scream, the absence of footprints all pointed to a crime of meticulous design. But it was the people, their motives and masks, that held the key. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by Tressilian, the butler, who appeared at the door, his aged face pale. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice trembling. I forgot to mention earlier. Before the scream, I heard something, a noise, like a thud, from the direction of the master's room. I thought it was just the furniture being moved, but now—" Poirot's eyes sharpened. "A thud, you say, and at what time?" "Precisely." Tressilian wrung his hands. "Perhaps 10 minutes before the scream. I can't be sure. The house was so quiet, it stood out." Poirot nodded, dismissing the butler, with a gentle wave. "Mercy, Tressilian. This is most illuminating." As the butler departed, Poirot returned to the crime scene, Simeon's study, with Sugden in tow. The room was as they had left it, the heavy oak door splintered from being forced open, the furniture in disarray, the bloodstains dark against the Persian rug. Poirot knelt beside the overturned chair, his fingers brushing the fabric. Then, his eyes caught a glint beneath the edge of the rug, a small, sparkling object, no larger than a pebble. He picked it up, holding it to the light. A diamond, rough-cut and unpolished, its facets catching the firelight in a cold, unyielding gleam. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, "what secrets do you hide?" Sugden leaned closer, his brow furrowed. "A diamond. You think this was about theft?" Poirot shook his head, slipping the diamond into his pocket. "Non, mon ami. Theft is too simple. This diamond, it is a clue, not a motive." Simeon Lee's fortune was vast, but his true wealth was in his power to manipulate. This stone, it is a piece of his past, and perhaps the key to his death. Sugden grunted, unconvinced. "You're saying someone killed him for a single diamond? Seems a stretch." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The stretch, Superintendent, is in assuming simplicity. This murder, it is a tapestry of deceit, woven with care. The locked room, the scream, the diamond doll are threads. We must unravel them, one by one." As they left the study, Poirot's mind returned to the interviews. Alfred's loyalty, Harry's indifference, George's greed, David's resentment, Pilar's charm, Stephen's distance. Each was a shadow, cast by the light of Simeon Lee's cruelty. The thud Tressilian heard, the diamond under the rug, the locked door with no footprints, these were the pieces of a puzzle that defied logic. But logic, Poirot knew, was his greatest ally. The day wore on, the snow piling higher outside, isolating Gorston Hall in a cocoon of white. The family avoided each other, their conversations stilted, their glances laden with suspicion. Poirot, however, was undeterred. He paced the corridors, his small feet silent on the thick carpets, his mind piecing together the fragments. The diamond, he thought, was no accident. Simeon's past in the diamond trade was well known, but why leave a single stone in plain sight? Was it a taunt, a mistake, or something more? Dinner that evening was a grim affair, the family seated around the same table where they had dined before the murder. Lydia, Alfred's wife, picked at her food, her delicate features drawn. "This is unbearable," she said softly, her voice cutting through the silence. "We're all suspects, aren't we? Trapped here, waiting for someone to point a finger." Magdalene, George's wife, gave a brittle laugh. "Speak for yourself, Lydia. Some of us have nothing to hide." Pilar's eyes flashed. "Nothing to hide. Everyone here has secrets. Grandfather knew that. He saw through all of you." Harry snorted, pouring himself another glass of wine. "And you, Pilar, the golden granddaughter, come to claim her share. Don't pretend you're above it." Stephen, seated at the table's end, said nothing, his gaze fixed on his plate. David's fingers tightened around his fork, his knuckles white. "Enough," he snapped. "This is Father's doing, even now, pitting us against each other, even from the grave." Poirot, seated as an observer, watched the exchange with keen interest. The family's unity was fracturing, each accusation a crack in the facade. He sipped his wine, his mind cataloguing their words, their gestures, their silences. As the meal ended, Poirot rose, his voice calm but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs, I urge you to reflect. The truth, it is not far. It hides in the shadows of your words, your actions. Tomorrow, we will speak again, and perhaps the light will fall upon the guilty." The family dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the vast hall. Poirot remained, his eyes on the fire, its flames casting long shadows. Across the room, the diamond in his pocket felt heavy, a reminder of the past that had bled into the present. The thud, the scream, the locked room, these were not random. They were deliberate, a performance staged by a killer who knew the house, the family, the man. As the clock struck midnight, Poirot retired to his room, his notebook filled with observations. The murder of Simeon Lee was no act of impulse. It was a calculated strike, designed to confound and mislead. But Hercule Poirot was not a man to be misled. The shadows of suspicion were thick, but he would cut through them, one by one, until the truth stood revealed. Chapter 5. The Ghost of Past Promises. The snow fell in relentless curtains beyond the tall, arched windows of Gorston Hall, cloaking the estate in a silence that felt both serene and oppressive. Inside, the air was thick with suspicion, the kind that clung to the ornate wood paneling and seeped into the heavy velvet drapes. Hercule Poirot sat in a high-backed chair in the library, his small, precise hands folded neatly over his waistcoat, his moustache impeccably trimmed despite the hour. His eyes, sharp as a falcon's, darted between the faces of the household, each one a mask of grief, fear, or calculation. The murder of Simeon Lee the previous night had shattered the fragile veneer of Christmas cheer, and now, as the morning light struggled through the storm, Poirot was determined to unearth the roots of this sinister affair. The library, with its towering shelves of leather-bound tomes and the faint scent of old paper, seemed an unlikely stage for such a grim investigation. Yet it was here, amid the quiet rustle of pages and the crackle of the fire in the hearth, that Poirot began his inquiry into Simeon Lee's past that seemed to coil like a serpent beneath the surface of the present tragedy. Madame Poirot began, his voice soft yet commanding, cutting through the murmurs of the gathered family. The death of Monsieur Simeon Lee is not merely a crime of passion or greed. It is a tapestry woven from threads of history, promises made, promises broken, and secrets buried deep. To understand the why of this murder, we must first understand the who of Simeon Lee. The family sat in a semicircle, their expressions ranging from wary to outright hostile. Alfred, the eldest son, sat ramrod straight, his loyalty to his father etched into the lines of his face, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Harry, the prodigal, lounged with a studied nonchalance, his fingers drumming on the armrest, a smirk playing at his lips. George, ever the politician, adjusted his cufflinks, his face a mask of practiced concern. David, the youngest, stared into the fire, his hands clenched, as if wrestling with ghosts only he could see. Their wives Lydia, Magdalene, and Hilda sat, with varying degrees of composure, while Pilar, Estrevado's Simeon's granddaughter, leaned forward, her dark eyes gleaming with an intensity that unnerved even Poirot. Stephen Farr, the outsider, stood apart, his tall frame silhouetted against the window, his expression unreadable. Poirot's gaze lingered on Stephen. "Monsieur Farr," he said, "you are, perhaps, the key to unlocking the past. You are the son of Simeon Lee's former partner in the diamond trade, are you not? Tell me, what do you know of your father's dealings with Simeon?" Stephen's jaw tightened, and for a moment it seemed he might refuse to answer. Then, with a slow exhale, he spoke, his voice low and measured. "My father, Jacob Farr, was Simeon's partner in South Africa, back when they were young men chasing fortunes. In the diamond mines, they struck it rich together, kimberlite pipes, raw diamonds the size of quail eggs. But Simeon, he had a way of bending the world to his will. He convinced my father to reinvest their earnings into a risky venture. When it failed, Simeon walked away with the lion's share of the remaining assets, claiming it was business. My father was left with nothing but debts and a broken spirit. He died a year later, penniless. Simeon promised him a share of the profits, a stake in the future. That promise was never kept. The room was silent, save for the soft hiss of the fire. Poirot tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "And you, Monsieur Farr, came to Gorston Hall at Simeon's invitation. Why now, after so many years?" Stephen's lips twitched, a bitter smile. "He sent me a letter 3 months ago. Said he wanted to make things right. I didn't trust him, never did, but I came anyway. Curiosity, maybe, or the faint hope that he'd honor my father's memory." Poirot nodded, his mind already sifting through the implications. A broken promise, a fortune built on betrayal. Here was a motive that burned brighter than greed. But Stephen's story was only one piece of the puzzle. He turned to the family, his gaze sweeping over them like a searchlight. "And you, messieurs, what do you know of your father's time in South Africa? Did he speak of his ventures, his triumphs, his enemies?" Alfred cleared his throat, his voice steady but strained. "Father rarely spoke of those days. He said the mines were a young man's game, brutal, unforgiving. He made his fortune and left it behind. That's all I know." Harry snorted, leaning back in his chair. "Oh, come off it, Alfred. Father loved to crow about his conquests, diamonds, deals, and the men he outsmarted. He'd sit there with his brandy, spinning tales of how he turned dirt into gold. Never mentioned your father, Stephen, but I'd wager he didn't lose sleep over him." David's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "Don't you dare speak of him like that, Harry. Father was a monster. Even then, he broke Mother's heart long before he broke anyone else's. South Africa was just the start, cheating partners, exploiting workers. He was a vulture, picking at the bones of other men's dreams." The room bristled with tension. Lydia, Alfred's wife, placed a calming hand on her husband's arm, but her own expression was troubled. Magdalene, George's wife, fiddled with her pearl necklace, her eyes darting nervously. Hilda, David's wife, sat quietly, her serene demeanor a stark contrast to her husband's fury. Pilar, however, leaned forward, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "My grandfather was a strong man. He did what he had to do to survive. You all sit here, judging him, but you live off his money." "No." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. "Mercy, Mademoiselle Estravados, your loyalty to your grandfather is noted, but let us return to the matter at hand. Monsieur Lee's past in the diamond trade is not merely a story of wealth, it is a story of trust betrayed, and trust, once broken, leaves scars that fester. Tell me, was there ever mention of a specific treasure, a cache of diamonds, perhaps, that Simeon kept hidden?" The question hung in the air, heavy as the snow outside. Tressilian, the butler, who had been standing discreetly by the door, stepped forward, his aged face creased with unease. "If I may, sir," he said, his voice quavering slightly. "Master Simeon did have a safe in his room. He never spoke of it openly, but I once overheard him muttering about his legacy, something about stones that no one would ever take from him. I thought it was just his way of talking, but after last night, I wonder." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A safe, you say? And where is this safe located?" Tressilian hesitated, then pointed toward the ceiling. "In his bedroom, sir, behind the portrait of his late wife, Mrs. Lee, a small thing, built into the wall. I only saw it once, when I was cleaning." The family exchanged glances, some surprised, others guarded. Poirot rose, smoothing his waistcoat. "A bean, let us investigate this safe. It may hold the key to why Simeon Lee met his end." The trek to Simeon's bedroom was a somber procession, the family trailing behind Poirot and Superintendent Sugden, like mourners at a funeral. The room itself was a grim reminder of the previous night's horror. The bloodstains had been cleaned, but the upturned furniture remained, a silent testament to the violence that had unfolded. The portrait of Mrs. Lee Astern, elegant woman with dark eyes and a wistful smile, hung above the fireplace, its gilt frame catching the dim light. Poirot, with Sugden's assistance, carefully removed the portrait, revealing a small steel safe embedded in the wall. The lock was intricate, a combination of dials and levers that spoke of Simeon's paranoia. "Superintendent," Poirot said, "have you the tools to open this?" Sugden nodded, producing a set of lock-picking instruments. "Not standard procedure, mind you, but I reckon this is no ordinary case." As Sugden worked, the family watched in tense silence. Alfred's face was pale, his hands clasped tightly. Harry's smirk had faded, replaced by a flicker of unease. George adjusted his glasses, his eyes fixed on the safe, as if it might bite. David stood apart, his gaze locked on the portrait of his mother, his expression unreadable. Pilar's fingers toyed with a pendant at her throat, her lips pressed into a thin line. Stephen, ever the outsider, leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. The safe clicked open with a soft groan, revealing nothing. The interior was empty, save for a faint dusting of rust and a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age. Poirot retrieved it, his movements deliberate. The paper bore a single line, written in Simeon's spidery hand: "The stones are safe, where no one will look." Poirot read the note aloud, his voice measured. "A riddle, perhaps, or a taunt. Monsieur Lee was a man who enjoyed his games. Nest George sputtered, his face reddening. What's this nonsense? If there were diamonds, they're gone. Stolen, no doubt, by whoever killed him. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Stolen, Monsieur George, or never there at all. The absence of the diamonds is as telling as their presence would have been. We must consider, did the killer know of this safe? Did they take its contents, or was it always empty? Lydia spoke up, her voice soft but firm. Simeon was not a man to leave things to chance. If he wrote that note, he meant for it to be found. Perhaps the diamonds are hidden elsewhere somewhere, only he would know. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. A possibility, madame, but we must also consider the alternative, that the diamonds are a distraction, a mirage, to obscure the true motive. Let us return to the library. There is more to discuss. Back in the library, the fire had dwindled to embers, casting long shadows across the room. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind weaving together the threads of the case, the empty safe, the note, Stephen's story of betrayal, David's hatred, the diamond found in the room, all were pieces of a puzzle that refused to snap into place. Mies Amos, Poirot said, stopping to face the family. Let us consider the character of Simeon Lee. A man of wealth, yes, but also a man of cruelty. He built his fortune on the ruins of others' partners, workers, even his own family. Monsieur David, you spoke of your mother's suffering. Tell me more. David's eyes darkened, his voice low and raw. She was everything to us, gentle, the opposite of him. But father, he crushed her. He had affairs, flaunted them, laughed when she begged him to stop. When I was a boy, I saw her crying in this very room, clutching a letter from one of his mistresses. She died when I was 15, worn out by his cruelty. I've never forgiven him. Hilda reached for her husband's hand, but he pulled away, his gaze fixed on the floor. Poirot watched him closely, noting the tremble in his hands, the anguish in his voice. And you believe, Monsieur David, that your father's past in South Africa shaped this cruelty? David nodded. He came back from the mines a different man, harder, colder. Whatever he did, whatever deals he made, whoever he betrayed, it changed him. Mother said he wasn't always like that, but I only knew the monster. Poirot turned to Pilar, who had been listening intently. And you, mademoiselle, your mother, Simeon's daughter, died when you were young. Did she ever speak of her father's past? Pilar's eyes flashed, her Spanish accent sharp. My mother loved him, even when he sent her away. She said he was a man of fire, a man who took what he wanted. She told me stories of his adventures, how he outwitted bandits, how he found diamonds in places others feared to look. But she never spoke of betrayal. She said he was complicated. Complicated, Poirot repeated, a faint smile tugging at his lips. A fitting word for a man whose life was a labyrinth of ambition and deceit. But let us consider the present. The safe is empty, yet a diamond was found in this room. A single stone, small but significant. Why was it left behind? Was it dropped by accident, or placed deliberately to mislead? Superintendent Sugden, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. If I may, Mr. Poirot, the diamond could be a plant. Someone wants us to think this is about theft, but the real motive might be personal. Poirot nodded approvingly. Precisement, Superintendent. The diamond is a clue, but not to a theft. It is a clue to a mindermind that wishes to obscure the truth. We must look beyond the glitter of wealth, to the shadows of the heart. The family stirred, uneasy. Harry lit a cigarette, his movements jerky. This is all very poetic, Poirot, but what's it mean? Someone killed the old man, and you're spinning riddles about diamonds and hearts. Why not just arrest Stephen? Here, he's got the motive, his father's ruin. Stephen's eyes narrowed, but before he could retort, Poirot raised a hand. Monsieur Harry, accusations are easy. Proof is not. Monsieur Farr's story gives him a motive, yes, but so do you all. Alfred, your loyalty to your father was strained by his mockery. George, your financial troubles made you dependent on his will. David, your hatred is a fire that burns bright. And Mademoiselle Pilar, your devotion to your grandfather may hide a deeper agenda. Even the wife is Madame Lydia, Madame Magdalene, Madame Irilda. Each of you has a stake in this game. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words pressing down like the snow outside. He continued, his voice soft but relentless. The past is a ghost that haunts this house. Simeon Lee's actions in South Africa, his betrayals, his promises have cast a long shadow. But it is here, in Gorston Hall, that the shadow took form. Someone in this room knew of the safe, knew of the diamonds, knew of the pain Simeon caused, and that someone acted. As the clock struck noon, its chimes echoing through the library, Poirot paused, his eyes scanning the faces before him. "We will reconvene this afternoon," he said. "But for now, I ask you to reflect. The truth is near. Mies, Amis. It hides in the cracks of your stories, in the silences you keep. And Hercule Poirot will find it." The family dispersed, their footsteps heavy on the polished floor. Poirot remained by the fire, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The empty safe, the cryptic note, the diamond, the broken promises, they were all pieces of a larger truth. Simeon Lee had been a man who thrived on control, on manipulation. His murder was no impulsive act. It was a calculated strike, born of a wound that had festered for years, that, as the snow continued to fall, Poirot felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The ghost of Simeon Lee's past was alive in Gorston Hall, and it would not rest until the truth was laid bare. Chapter 6. The clue and the crimson stain. The snow fell relentlessly outside Gorston Hall, cloaking the estate in a deceptive shroud of purity. Inside, the air was thick with suspicion, each breath laced with the unspoken accusations that hung over the household like a storm cloud. Hercule Poirot, his small frame bundled against the chill that seeped through the manor's ancient walls, stood once more in the room where Simeon Lee had met his brutal end. The heavy oak door, now unbolted but scarred from the force used to break it down, creaked faintly as Superintendent Sugden pushed it open to join him. "Cold as a tomb in here," Sugden muttered, his breath visible in the dim light filtering through the frost-etched windows. "Makes you wonder if the old man's ghost is lingering, doesn't it?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of his disapproval at such fanciful notions. "Ghosts, Superintendent, do not slash throats or overturn furniture. It is the living we must concern ourselves with and their secrets." The room was much as it had been the night before, save for the absence of Simeon's body, now resting in the village mortuary. The bloodstains remained, a grotesque map of the crime, pooling darkly on the polished floorboards and splattered across the upturned armchair. The heavy mahogany table lay on its side, its legs jutting awkwardly, as though it had been flung. In a fit of rage, Poirot's eyes, sharp and unyielding, traced the chaos with meticulous care. Something about the scene nagged at him, a discordance in the violence, a whisper of artifice beneath the brutality. He crouched beside the largest bloodstain, its edges now crusted and browning. The metallic temps still lingered, but there was something else, faint yet unmistakable, a chemical odor, sharp and acrid, like the residue of some volatile substance. Poirot's gloved fingers hovered over the stain, not touching but noting its peculiar shape. It was not a simple pool but a pattern, as though the blood had been directed, perhaps manipulated. He tilted his head, his mind racing. "Superintendent," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "this blood does not behave as blood should. Regardless the edges here, they are too precise, too deliberate." Sugden, rubbing his hands for warmth, leaned closer. "Deliberate? You mean someone tampered with it?" Perhaps, Poirot mused, or perhaps the blood itself is not the whole story. This odorate is not natural. It suggests interference. Sugden frowned, his practical mind grappling with Poirot's cryptic observation. "Interference? You think the killer doctored the scene?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he rose and moved to the overturned furniture, his polished shoes clicking softly on the floor. The armchair, he noted, was heavy, its carved frame solid oak. To append it would require strength or leverage. He ran a finger along the edge of the table, pausing at a faint scratch mark, barely visible against the dark wood. It was fresh, the wood beneath still pale and unweathered. A faint smile curved his lips. The scene was not chaos. It was choreography. "Superintendent," Poirot said, turning abruptly, "we must consider the possibility that the crash we heard, the so-called struggle, was not a struggle at all. It was a distraction, staged to mislead." Sugden's eyes widened. "Staged? You're saying the killer planned this mess to throw us off precisely? The locked door, the overturned furniture, to scream all elements of a performance. But for whom? And why?" Sugden scratched his chin, his skepticism warring with his respect for Poirot's reputation. "All right, let's say you're right. How do we prove it?" Poirot's gaze returned to the bloodstain. "We begin with the clues the killer could not erase. This odor, for instance, it is not blood, nor is it the polish of the furniture. It is something else, something chemical, perhaps used to mask or alter the scene. And these stains," he gestured to the floor, "they tell a story, but not the one the killer wishes us to believe." Leaving Sugden to ponder this, Poirot crossed the room to the window, its heavy velvet curtains drawn back to reveal the snow-covered grounds. No footprints marred the pristine white expanse below, confirming what he already knew. No one had entered or exited through the window. The locked door then remained the central enigma. He turned his attention to the lock itself, a sturdy brass mechanism embedded in the door. It was undamaged, its bolt intact when the door was forced open, yet something about its placement nagged at him, a faint irregularity in the frame, a slight misalignment that suggested tampering. As he examined the lock, a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Lydia Lee, Alfred's wife, stood in the doorway, her pale face framed by the dark fur of her shawl. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, flickered with unease. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, "I hope I'm not intruding. I overheard something last night, before the scream. I didn't mention it earlier because I wasn't sure it mattered. But now," Poirot's attention sharpened, "Madame, no detail is too small in a matter of murder. What did you hear?" Lydia hesitated, glancing at Sugden, who nodded encouragingly. "I was in the corridor, near Simeon's room, fetching a book from the library. I heard voices," his voice, angry, "and another, softer, harder to place. It wasn't one of the family, I'm sure of it. It was different. Not a servant either." The words were muffled, but Simeon sounded furious, as though he were arguing about something vital. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And this voice, this other voice, did it belong to a man or a woman?" Lydia frowned, her brow furrowing. "I couldn't say. It was low, almost a whisper, but it wasn't Harry or George or any of the others. I'd know their voices anywhere." "And what time was this, madame?" "Just before the crash, perhaps 10 minutes. I went back to the drawing room afterward, and then we all heard the scream." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing this new piece of the puzzle. "Merci, madame. Your candor is most valuable. If you recall anything more, you must tell me at once." Lydia inclined her head and withdrew, her footsteps fading down the corridor. Sugden watched her go, then turned to Poirot. "Another voice. That complicates things. If it wasn't family or staff, who the devil was it?" Poirot did not reply immediately. Instead, he returned to the lock, his fingers tracing the faint scratches around its edge. "Superintendent, I require a tool, a small screwdriver, perhaps, from the household staff. We must examine this lock more closely." Sugden dispatched a constable to fetch the tool, and while they waited, Poirot paced the room, his mind a whirlwind of connections. The chemical odor, the bloodstains, unnatural pattern, the overturned furniture, the mysterious voice, all pointed to a crime far more intricate than a simple act of violence. The killer had planned not only the murder, but the illusions surrounding it, crafting a stage to deceive. When the screwdriver arrived, Poirot set to work with a precision that belied his fastidious appearance. He removed the lock plate, revealing the inner mechanism. There, nestled in the wood, was a tiny metal shim, barely thicker than a hair. It had been wedged into the bolt's path, preventing it from fully engaging. Poirot held it up to the light, his eyes narrowing. "Voila," he said softly, "the secret of the locked door." This shimmet was placed to make the door appear locked from within, but in truth, it could be opened with ease. The killer entered, committed the act, and exited, leaving the illusion of an impossible crime. Sugden whistled. "Clever, but that means the killer knew the house well enough to tamper with the lock beforehand." "Exactement. And it means the crash, the scream, the chaos all were designed to distract from this simple trick. But we are not yet done. The blood, the odor, these two must be explained." The rest of the morning passed in a flurry of investigation. Poirot summoned Tressilian, the butler, whose lined face betrayed the strain of the past 24 hours. The old man stood stiffly, his hands clasped behind his back, as Poirot questioned him about the chemical odor. "I can't say I noticed anything unusual, sir," Tressilian said, his voice steady but weary. "But then, my nose isn't what it used to be. The room always smelled of Mr. Lee's cigars and the furniture polish we use. If there was something else, I might have missed it. And the crash, Tressilian, did you hear anything before it? A sound, perhaps, that seemed out of place. The butler's brow furrowed. "Now that you mention it, sir, there was a queer sort of thud, like something heavy being dragged, just before the scream. I thought it was Mr. Lee moving his chair, but it was odd, not a sound I'd heard before." Poirot nodded, filing this away. "Merci, Tressilian, you have been most helpful." As the butler departed, Poirot turned to Succedan. "A thud, a chemical odor, a staged crash. The killer is a director, superintendent, orchestrating a play for our benefit. But every director leaves a signature, and we shall find it." The investigation spilled into the afternoon, with Poirot and Sugden combing the room for further clues. In a corner near the fireplace, Poirot discovered a faint smudge on the hearthstone, a trace of ash, tinged with the same chemical scent. He scraped a sample into a small envelope, his mind racing. The ash suggested a fire, but the grate was cold, its logs untouched since the previous evening. The odor, he suspected, might be linked to a substance used to create the illusion of chaos, perhaps a small explosive or a chemical compound designed to mimic the sound of a struggle. As the day waned, Poirot's thoughts turned to the family. Each member had a motive, a grievance nursed by years of Simeon's cruelty. Yet the precision of the crime, the shim, the staged scene, the mysterious voice suggested a mind both cunning and intimate with the household's workings. He resolved to test a theory about the locked door's mechanism, but first he needed to confront the family with this new evidence. In the drawing room, the Lees sat in uneasy silence, their Christmas Eve tragedy casting a pall over the festive decorations. The Christmas tree, adorned with glass baubles and tinsel, seemed a mockery of the season's cheer. Poirot entered, his presence commanding despite his diminutive stature. "Madame et messieurs," he began, his voice cutting through the tension. "I have made a discovery. The door to Monsieur Lee's room was not truly locked. A small device or shim was used to create the illusion of security. The killer entered and exited with ease, staging the scene to mislead us." A ripple of shock passed through the room. Alfred, pale and drawn, clutched Lydia's hand. Harry, lounging with forced nonchalance, raised an eyebrow. George sputtered, his face reddening, while David's eyes narrowed, his fingers tightening on the arm of his chair. Pilar, seated near the window, watched Poirot with an unreadable expression, her dark eyes gleaming. "And what does that mean, Monsieur Poirot?" Lydia asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Does it clear any of us?" "It means," Poirot said, "that the killer is among us, and they are clever. But they have made a mistake. The blood, the odor, the sounds, these are clues that will betray them. I ask you now, who among you heard anything unusual before the scream? A voice, perhaps, as Madame Lydia did." The room fell silent, each face a mask of guarded calculation. Finally, Pilar spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I heard nothing, Monsieur Poirot, but I was in my room, far from grandfather's. If there was a voice, it was not meant for me to hear." Harry snorted. "Convenient, isn't it? The exotic granddaughter, always so innocent." Pilar's eyes flashed, but she said nothing. Poirot watched the exchange, his mind noting the undercurrents of hostility. The family was a powder keg, and the killer had lit the fuse. As the evening drew to a close, Poirot retired to his guest room, his notebook filled with observations. He sketched the bloodstains pattern, marking its unnatural edges. He listed the chemical odor, the shim, the thud, the mysterious voice. Each clue was a thread, and he was weaving them into a tapestry of truth. The locked door, he now knew, was no barrier at all. The real puzzle was the killer's intent, not just to kill, but to deceive. He closed his notebook and gazed out at the snow, now falling in heavy flakes. "The clue in the crimson stain," he murmured. "It is not just blood, but a signature. And I, Hercule Poirot, will read it." Chapter 7. The Outsider's Gambit. The snow fell in relentless curtains beyond the frosted windows of Gorston Hall, cloaking the estate in a deceptive serenity that belied the storm brewing within. The Christmas Eve murder of Simeon Lee had cast a pall over the household, transforming the festive warmth of the season into a chilling tableau of suspicion and dread. The grand manor, with its oak-panelled halls and flickering firelight, seemed to pulse with secrets, each shadowed corner whispering of betrayal. Hercule Poirot, his small frame wrapped in a meticulously tailored overcoat, stood in the drawing room, his sharp eyes scanning the faces of the assembled family. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, and the weight of the patriarch's death pressed heavily on every soul. Stephen Farr, the enigmatic son of Simeon's former business partner, lingered near the hearth, his lean figure silhouetted against the fire's glow. His presence had been a point of contention since his arrival, an outsider thrust into the Lee family's tightly wound drama. His dark eyes, keen and guarded, met Poirot's briefly before flickering away, as if wary of revealing too much. Pilar Estravados, Simeon's exotic granddaughter, sat poised on a velvet settee, her olive skin catching the candlelight, her expression a blend of defiance and curiosity. The four Lee brothers, Alfred, Harry, George, and David stood, or sat, in various states of agitation, their wives orbiting them like satellites drawn into a tense gravitational pull. Superintendent Sugden, a solid, no-nonsense figure, hovered near the door, his notebook open, his pen poised to capture any slip. Off the tongue, Poirot cleared his throat, a delicate sound that nonetheless commanded the room's attention. Miss, he began, his voice smooth yet carrying the weight of authority. We find ourselves in a most curious predicament. The death of Monsieur Simeon Lee is not merely a tragedy, but a puzzle of the most intricate design. The locked room, the absence of footprints in the snow, the diamond found upon the floor, these are not mere details but threads in a tapestry of deceit. Today, I wish to explore the role of the outsider, for it is often the stranger among us who sees most clearly or conceals most cleverly. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Harry Lee, the prodigal son with a roguish charm, leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. You're pointing at Stephen, aren't you, Poirot? The man's barely set foot in this house, and now you're making him out to be some mastermind criminal. Stephen's lips twitched, but he said nothing, his gaze fixed on the fire. Poirot raised a hand, his fingers delicate, as if sculpting the air. Nan, Monsieur Harry, a point at no one yet. But Monsieur Farr's presence raises questions, does it not? A man arrives from afar, the son of a partner wronged by Simeon Lee in the days of the diamond trade. Is it coincidence, or is it destiny? Pilar's dark eyes flashed, and she rose, her silk dress rustling like a whisper of secrets. This is unfair. Stephen has done nothing but be kind to me, to all of us. Why must you cast suspicion on him, when it is clear this family, she gestured broadly at the brothers, has enough hatred among them to choke a horse? Pilar, my dear, sit down, said Lydia, Alfred's wife, her voice gentle but firm. Her delicate features were drawn, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Monsieur Poirot is only doing his job. We must all answer his questions, must we? David Lee's voice was sharp, his artist's hands clenched into fists. His hatred for his father had been laid bare in earlier conversations, a wound still raw from years of perceived slights. This is a circus, and we're all performing for Poirot's amusement. Why not ask about father's enemies outside this house? He had plenty. You know, men he ruined, women he scorned. Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. A most excellent point, Monsieur David. But let us consider the immediate. Monsieur Farr, perhaps you would indulge Poirot with a recounting of your purpose here at Gorston Hall. Stephen straightened, his jaw tight. The firelight cast shadows across his angular face, giving him an almost spectral quality. I came because Simeon invited me, he said, his voice low and measured. He wrote to me in Cape Town, said he wanted to make amends for what happened to my father. I didn't trust him, not entirely, but I was curious. My father died a broken man, Poirot, after Simeon cheated him out of his share in the diamond mines. I wanted to hear what the old man had to say, and what did he say? Poirot's eyes gleamed, sharp as the diamond found in Simeon's room. Stephen hesitated, glancing at the family. We spoke briefly on my arrival. He was cagey, said he'd reveal more at his grand announcement. He hinted at a gesture, of goodwill reparations perhaps, but he never got the chance to explain, did he? Indeed, Poirot murmured, pacing slowly before the hearth. And where were you, Monsieur Farr, when the scream shattered the peace of Christmas Eve? I was in the servants' quarters, Stephen replied, his tone steady. I'd gone to fetch a glass of water. The butler, Tressilian, can confirm. He saw me there. Tressilian, standing silently in the corner, nodded stiffly. That's right, sir. Mr. Farr was in the passageway near the kitchen. I saw him just before the commotion upstairs. Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, turning instead to Pilar. And you, Mademoiselle S., you were alone, you said, when the scream was heard. Pilar tossed her head, her dark hair cascading over one shoulder. Yes, I was in my room, reading. I heard the crash, then the scream, and I ran to grandfather's door like everyone else. I don't see why this matters. I loved him. He was the only one who welcomed me here." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, the room softened toward her, but Poirot's gaze remained unyielding. "Love, mademoiselle, can be emotive as powerful as hate, and you stand to gain from your grandfather's will, do you not?" Pilar's cheeks flushed, and she opened her mouth to retort, but Harry cut in, his voice booming. "Now, see here, Poirot, you're barking up the wrong tree. Pilar's a girl, barely out of her teens, and Stephen's an outsider who barely knew the old man. If you're looking for someone with a reason to kill, look at us." He gestured to his brothers. "Alfred's been kissing father's boots for years. George is drowning in debt, and David's been nursing a grudge since mother died. Why waste time on these two?" Alfred's face reddened, his loyalty to his father a sore point. "That's enough, Harry. You've no right to drag us all through the mud just because you've squandered your own life. Gentlemen, please," Poirot interjected, his voice cutting through the rising din like a blade. "The truth does not emerge from chaos. Let us return to the facts. Monsieur Farr, you spoke of your father's ruin. Did Simeon Lee ever mention a specific debt, perhaps a diamond, or a sum of money owed to your family?" Stephen's eyes darkened, and he leaned forward, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "He mentioned a diamond once, in passing, said it was a trifle compared to what he'd built. My father always claimed Simeon stole a particular stone, a rare pink diamond, worth a fortune. But Simeon laughed it off when I brought it up, said my father was delusional." Poirot's eyebrows rose, a spark of interest igniting in his expression. "A pink diamond, you say? Most intriguing, and yet we found a single diamond in Simeon's room, not pink, but clear and small. A curiosity, Nan." The room fell silent, the weight of the diamonds mentioned settling like dust. George Lee, his florid face glistening with sweat, shifted uncomfortably. "What's all this about diamonds? Father's wealth was in his accounts, his investments. You're chasing fairy tales, Poirot." "Perhaps," Poirot said softly, his tone laced with something unreadable. "But fairy tales often hide truths, Monsieur George, and truths, like diamonds, are multifaceted." As the conversation paused, Poirot's attention shifted to the window, where a faint draught stirred the heavy curtains. He crossed the room with deliberate steps, his polished shoes clicking on the parquet floor. The family watched, puzzled, as he knelt and examined the window frame, his fingers brushing the sill. With a small exclamation, he plucked something from the gap between the wood and the wall, a scrap of fabric, torn and slightly singed, no larger than a postage stamp. "What's that?" Superintendent Sugden asked, stepping forward. Poirot held the fabric to the light, its edges frayed, its color a muted gray. "A clue, perhaps," he said. "This window, it overlooks the terrace, does it not? And beyond, the snow-covered grounds. Yet there are no footprints, no signs of an intruder scaling the wall. Curious, is it not, that this fabric should be here, as if caught in a moment of haste?" Pilar's eyes widened, and she leaned forward. "You think someone climbed out, but how?" "The snow precisely," Mademoiselle Poirot interrupted, his voice sharp. "The snow is undisturbed. This suggests the window was opened, perhaps as a ruse, to make us believe an outsider fled the scene. But the fabricate tells a different story. It is not the cloth of a servant's uniform, nor of any garment I have observed in this household. It is unusual." Stephen's jaw tightened, and he stood abruptly. "If you're implying I planted that, Poirot, you're mistaken. I was nowhere near that window." "I imply nothing, Monsieur Farr," Poirot said calmly, slipping the fabric into a small envelope. "But I observe. An observation, it is the foundation of truth." The tension in the room was palpable, a coiled spring ready to snap. Lydia, ever the peacemaker, rose and touched Alfred's arm. "Perhaps we should adjourn for now. This is all so overwhelming. Monsieur Poirot, you'll continue your inquiries, I'm sure." Poirot inclined his head. "Mais, oui, madame. The little grey cells, they are never at rest. But I must ask one final question before we part. Mademoiselle Pilar, you spoke of your grandfather's kindness. Did he ever mention a specific gift or bequest, perhaps, tied to his diamonds?" Pilar hesitated, her fingers twisting a bracelet on her wrist. He said he wanted to secure my future, that I deserved more than the others because I came to him with nothing, He mentioned something about a surprise in his will, but he didn't say what. The brothers exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from suspicion to outright hostility. George muttered something under his breath, while David's face darkened, his resentment palpable. Harry, however, laughed a harsh, barking sound. A surprise. Sounds like father, stirring the pot even from the grave. Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. Merci, mademoiselle. That is all for now. But rest assured, Poirot will unravel this knot, thread by thread. As the family dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall, Poirot lingered by the window, the scrap of fabric weighing heavily in his pocket. Superintendent Sugden approached, his brow furrowed. Do you really think that fabric means something, Poirot? It could be nothing, a servant's rag, caught by accident. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Nothing, mon ami, is ever nothing in a murder. This fabric, it is a whisper of intent. Someone wished us to believe an outsider entered or left through this window. But the snow, it does not lie. No one passed through that night. The answer lies within these walls. Sugden grunted, unconvinced. You're ruling out an intruder. Then, for now, Poirot said, his voice soft but firm. The circle of suspicion tightens, and it is within the family and their secrets that we will find our killer. The afternoon wore on, the snow piling higher outside, sealing Gorston Hall in a cocoon of isolation. Poirot retreated to the library, where he spread his notes across a mahogany table, his mind a whirl of connections. The fabric, the diamond, Stephen's story, Pilar's inheritance, each piece was a fragment of a larger whole. But the shape of that whole remained elusive. He was interrupted by a soft knock. Tressilian, the butler, entered, his face pale. Sir, I thought you should know Miss Pilar was asking about the window in the master's room. She seemed agitated. Said something about it being opened before the scream. Poirot's head snapped up. Vraiment. And did she say why this concerned her? Tressilian shook his head. No, sir. But she was insistent. Kept saying it didn't make sense. I thought it odd, her being so curious. Most interesting, Poirot murmured, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. Mercy, you have done well to tell me. As the butler retreated, Poirot leaned back, his eyes half closed. Pilar's agitation, Stephen's guarded demeanor, the torn fabricate all pointed to a carefully orchestrated deception. But whose, and why? The answer, he knew, lay in the interplay of motives, the hidden currents of greed, vengeance, and betrayal that ran through the Lee family like a poisoned vein. Dinner that evening was a strained affair. The clink of silverware against porcelain, the only sound breaking the silence. The family ate in the dining room, its long table adorned with holly and candles that did little to dispel the gloom. Poirot, seated at the far end, observed the dynamics with keen interest. Alfred and Lydia sat close, their unity a quiet strength. George and his wife Magdalen exchanged terse whispers, their financial strain evident. David sat alone, his thoughts elsewhere. Harry sprawled in his chair, his defiance almost performative. Pilar and Stephen, seated across from each other, avoided eye contact, their earlier camaraderie strained. As the meal ended, Poirot rose, his presence commanding attention. Mesdames et messieurs, I have one small announcement. The scrap of fabric found by the window, it is not, as I first thought, a random artifact. It matches a garment in this house, one I have seen but cannot yet place. Tomorrow, I shall conduct a thorough search of the rooms. I advise you all to be cooperative. The announcement landed like a stone in a still pond, sending ripples of panic through the room. George spluttered, a search? That's preposterous. David's eyes narrowed, while Pilar's hand froze on her glass. Stephen's expression remained unreadable, but his fingers tightened around his fork. Poirot smiled faintly, bowing slightly. Bonne nuit, Mies, Amos. Sleep well, if you can. As he left the dining room, the weight of their stares followed. Him, the outsider's gambit, he mused, was not Stephen's alone. Someone in this house had played a dangerous game, staging a murder to look like an outsider's work. But the fabric, the snow, the locked room, they all pointed inward, to a heart darkened by vengeance or greed. Tomorrow, Poirot vowed, he would peel back another layer of this festive fatality, bringing him one step closer to unmasking the killer in their midst. Chapter 8. The Masquerade of Motives. The snow fell in relentless sheets outside Gorston Hall, cloaking the estate in a deceptive shroud of purity. Inside, The air was thick with suspicion, each breath laced with the unspoken accusations that had festered since Simeon Lee's brutal murder. Christmas Day had dawned, but the festive spirit was a hollow mockery, smothered by the weight of a killer still lurking among the household. The grand dining room, adorned with holly and flickering candles, felt more like a stage for a grim masquerade than a place of celebration. Hercule Poirot, his sharp eyes scanning the gathered family, sensed the tension coiling tighter. Ready to snap, the table was set with an elegance that belied the chaos of the previous night. Crystal glasses gleamed under the chandelier, and the scent of roasted pheasant mingled with the faint metallic tamps of fear. Alfred Lee, the eldest son, sat rigidly at the head, his face a mask of strained dignity. His wife Lydia toyed with her napkin, her delicate features betraying a flicker of unease. Harry, the prodigal son, slouched in his chair, his roguish charm dimmed by a scowl. George, the pompous politician, dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief, his eyes darting to his wife, Magdalen, whose painted smile was as brittle as the ice outside. David, the youngest son, sat apart, his artist's hands clenched, his gaze fixed on some distant memory. Pilar Estravados, Simeon's enigmatic granddaughter, radiated a quiet defiance, her dark eyes glinting with secrets. Stephen Farr, the outsider, leaned back, his expression unreadable, though his presence seemed to unsettle the room like a discordant note in a symphony. Poirot, seated near Colonel Johnson and Superintendent Sugden, observed the family with the precision of a watchmaker. Each gesture, each glance, was a clue in the intricate puzzle of Simeon's death. The locked room, the upturned furniture, the slashed throat, the missing diamonds all pointed to a crime as theatrical as it was calculated. But it was the hidden passage, discovered only hours ago, that had shifted the investigation's focus. The narrow corridor behind Simeon's room, used by servants to deliver coal and linens, was too cramped for the heavy oak furniture to have been moved through it, yet it suggested a cunning mind, one that had orchestrated the illusion of an impossible murder. Mise Amos, Poirot began, his voice cutting through the clink of cutlery. This morning, we gather not to celebrate, but to confront the shadow that hangs over Gorston Hall. A man is dead, and the truth, it hides behind a masquerade of motives. The room stilled. Alfred's fork paused mid-air. Harry's smirk faded. Magdalene's fan snapped shut. Poirot's words, delivered with his characteristic blend of courtesy and steel, demanded attention. Let us consider, he continued, the nature of this crime. Simeon Lee was not merely killed. He was dispatched with a flourish, a performance designed to shock and deceive. The crash of furniture, the locked door, the absence of footprints in the snow, these are not accidents, but deliberate strokes of a painter's brush, crafting a picture of impossibility. Lydia's voice, soft but clear, broke the silence. Monsieur Poirot, are you suggesting the murderer is among us, playing a part? Poirot's moustache twitched. Precisement, madame. The killer wears a mask, as do we all in this house of secrets. But masks, they slip, and the truth, it will emerge. George cleared his throat, his tone officious. This is preposterous. You're implying one of you Simeon's own family could commit such a barbaric act. I was with Magdalen in our room when the scream was heard. My alibi is unimpeachable. Impeccable, perhaps, Poirot said, tilting his head, but not unquestionable. Alibis, like motives, can be constructed with care. Tell me, Monsieur George, your father's wealth, it is vital to your political ambitions. Nan. George's face reddened. How dare you? My finances are my own affair. I've no need to grovel for father's money. Yet, Harry interjected, his voice dripping with mockery. You've been sweating over those campaign debts, haven't you, old boy? Father's little jabs about cutting you off didn't exactly soothe your nerves. Enough, Harry, Alfred snapped, his knuckles whitening on the table. You're hardly one to talk. You've been sponging off father for years, waltzing back here expecting a handout. Harry leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with defiance. And why not? I'm his son, same as you. If I'm a black sheep, at least I'm honest about it. Unlike some, hiding behind loyalty while dreaming of the old man's fortune. Pilar's laughter, sharp and musical, cut through the bickering. You all squabble like children over sweets, but grandfather's wealth was his to give or take. Perhaps he saw through your masks long before Monsieur Poirot arrived. The room bristled at her words. David, who had been silent, slammed his fist on the table, his voice raw with emotion. Don't speak of him as if he was some saint, Pilar. He was a tyrant, a cruel, heartless man who drove our mother to her grave. If anyone deserved his fate, it was him." The accusation hung in the air, heavy as the snow outside. Colonel Johnson shifted uncomfortably, while Sugden's pencil scratched furiously in his notebook. Poirot, however, remained unruffled, his gaze fixed on David, a powerful sentiment. "Monsieur David," Poirot said softly, "hatred, it is a motive as old as time. But let us not rush to judgment. There is more to uncover, and the truth, it lies in the details." The meal continued in uneasy silence, broken only by the clatter of plates and the howling wind. Poirot's mind, however, was far from idle. The hidden passage, discovered behind a false panel in Simeon's room, was a revelation, but its narrow dimensions puzzled him. The heavy oak table, the toppled chair, the shattered vase, none could have been maneuvered through that cramped corridor, yet the passage suggested access, a way to enter or exit unseen. And then there was the cryptic note, found tucked in Simeon's desk drawer during a second search that morning. Written in Simeon's spidery hand, it read, "The past is not buried, it waits to be claimed." The words gnawed at Poirot, hinting at a secret older than the murder itself. After breakfast, Poirot requested a private audience with Tressilian, the butler, whose long service at Gorston Hall made him a repository of the family's history. They met in the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound volumes and warmed by a crackling fire. Tressilian, his face etched with the weariness of decades, stood stiffly by the hearth. "Monsieur Tressilian," Poirot began, "you have served the Lee family for many years. You know their secrets, their grudges. Tell me, what did you hear on the night of the murder, beyond the scream and the crash?" Tressilian's eyes flickered with hesitation. "I've told you, sir, there was a noise, a queer sort of thud, like something heavy falling, before the scream. I was in the pantry, polishing the silver. I thought nothing of it at the time, what with the storm and all. And this thud," Poirot pressed, "it was distinct from the crash of furniture." "Yes, sir, it was. Muffled, like, came from upstairs, I reckon, but not loud enough to raise alarm until the scream followed." Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled. "And what of the family? Did Simeon speak of his plans, his will, his past, in the days before his death?" Tressilian's lips tightened. "Mr. Lee was not one for confidences, sir, but he was unsettled. These last weeks kept muttering about debts owed, promises broken. Once, I heard him say to himself, 'They'll all come crawling when the truth's out.' I didn't know what he meant, and I didn't ask." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Merci, Tressilian. You have been most helpful." As the butler departed, Poirot paced the library, his mind a whirl of connections. The thud, the note, the passage all pointed to a plan executed with precision, yet designed to appear chaotic. The murderer had not only killed Simeon, but had choreographed the scene to confound investigation. But why? To hide the motive, or to obscure the method? His thoughts were interrupted by Lydia, who entered with a hesitant step. Her pale blue dress seemed to absorb the firelight, casting her in a ghostly glow. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, "I must speak with you. There's something I didn't mention earlier, something I overheard." Poirot gestured to a chair. "Please, madame, sit. What did you hear?" Lydia clasped her hands, her knuckles white. "Before the scream, I was in the corridor near Simeon's room, fetching a shawl from my room. I heard voices, his and another's. They were arguing, but the words were muffled. I couldn't make out who it was, but it was heated, almost desperate. And this voice," Poirot said, leaning forward, "was it male or female?" "I couldn't tell," she admitted. "The storm was loud, and the door was thick. But it wasn't one of the servants, I'm sure of that. It was someone familiar." Poirot's mind raced. Lydia's account corroborated Tressilian's mention of a noise, suggesting a confrontation before the murder. But who had been in Simeon's room? The locked door and bolted window ruled out an outsider, unless the passage had been used. Yet the passage's limitations made that unlikely for the furniture's upheaval. "Madame," Poirot said, "this is most significant. You must tell no one of this, not even your husband. The truth, it is close, but it requires care to uncover." Lydia nodded, her eyes wide with apprehension, and left the library. Poirot turned to the window, watching the snow swirl in the wind. The storm, like the crime, was a force of nature, obscuring clarity. But clarity, Poirot knew, was his domain. He spent the afternoon retracing the crime scene, accompanied by Superintendent Sugden, whose practical demeanor contrasted with Poirot's cerebral intensity. The room, now tidied but still heavy with the memory of blood, yielded new insights. Poirot examined the fireplace, where the hidden passage's entrance lay concealed behind a false panel. He tested its mechanism, noting its silent operation, a marvel of engineering, likely installed decades ago when Simeon built the manor. Sugden, Poirot said, crouching by the hearth. This passage, it is too narrow for the furniture, yet it is the key to the illusion. The murderer used it, I am certain, but not to move the table or chair, perhaps to enter, to exit, or to plant a clue. Sugden frowned. But why the fuss with the furniture? If they got in and out through the passage, why stage all that chaos? To distract mon ami, Poirot replied. The crash, the upturned room, it draws the eye, like a magician's sleight of hand. It makes us question the impossible, while the possible hides in plain sight. Sugden grunted, unconvinced but deferential. And the note, the past is not buried, sounds like old Simeon was stirring up trouble. Precisement, Poirot said. Simeon Lee was a man who wielded secrets like weapons. His note suggests a revelation, one that threatened someone enough to kill. As evening fell, the household gathered for a somber Christmas dinner. The mood was strained, the festive decorations a cruel irony. Poirot, ever observant, noted the dynamics: Harry's barbed comments to George, Magdalene's nervous laughter, David's brooding silence, Pilar's defiant poise, and Stephen's detached scrutiny. Each was a player in this deadly game, their motives interwoven like threads in a tapestry. After dinner, Poirot requested a private word with Stephen Farr, whose outsider status made him both suspect and enigma. They met in the study, a smaller room cluttered with Simeon's papers and relics of his diamond trading days. Stephen, leaning against the desk, met Poirot's gaze with a mix of wariness and curiosity. Monsieur Farr, Poirot began, you are a stranger to this family, yet you are tied to Simeon Lee's past. Tell me of your father's claim to his wealth. Stephen's jaw tightened. My father was Simeon's partner in South Africa, back when they were scraping diamonds out of the dirt. Simeon promised him half the profits, but when the big strike came, Simeon cut him out. Father died penniless, believing he'd been cheated. I came here to see if Simeon would honor that debt. And did he? Poirot asked. Stephen laughed bitterly. He dangled it, like he dangled everything, said he'd consider my claim, but only if I played his game. He loved pitting us against each other, me, his sons, even Pilar. It was his sport. Poirot nodded, filing away Stephen's resentment. And where were you, monsieur, when the scream was heard? In the garden, smoking. Stephen said, I needed air after Simeon's little show at dinner. The servants saw me ask them. Poirot inclined his head. I shall, but tell me, did Simeon speak of diamonds, of a fortune hidden or lost? Stephen hesitated, then nodded. He hinted at something bigger, cash he'd kept from the family. Said it was his insurance, his legacy. I thought he was bluffing, but now, maybe it was real. The conversation ended, but Poirot's suspicions deepened. Stephen's story aligned with the empty safe, and the single diamond found in Simeon's room. Was the fortune a motive, a distraction, or both? And how did it connect to the passage, the noise, the murder? As night descended, Poirot retired to his room, but sleep eluded him. He sat by the window, the snow glowing faintly under the moon. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, yet the picture remained incomplete. The passage, the note, the thud, the argument, they pointed to a killer who knew Gorston Hall intimately, who had planned every detail to mask their guilt. But the motive, Poirot sensed, was not merely greed. It was personal, rooted in the past. Simeon had taunted with his cryptic note. The next morning, Poirot convened the family in the drawing-room. The air was heavy with anticipation, each member eyeing the others with suspicion. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his small frame commanding the room. Madame et messieurs, he said, we approach the truth, but it is guarded by deception. The hidden passage, it was used, not to move the furniture, but to create the illusion of an impossible crime. The crash, the scream, they were timed, staged, to confuse. And the note, it speaks of a past that one of you could not allow to surface. He paused, letting the words settle. Today, I will ask questions, and I will listen. But know this, the mask of the murderer is slipping, and soon, it will fall. The family exchanged glances, their faces a gallery of fear, anger, and defiance. Poirot's gaze lingered on each, searching for the telltale sign, the flicker of guilt that would betray the killer. The chapter closed with the household dispersing, their civility fraying, and Poirot stepping into the snow-draped garden, his mind alight with the certainty that the next revelation would unmask the murderer. The masquerade of motives had reached its climax, and the truth, Poirot knew, was within reach. Chapter 9. The Veil of Deception. The snow fell in relentless curtains beyond the frosted windows of Gorston Hall, cloaking the estate in a deceptive serenity that belied the storm brewing within. Christmas Day had dawned, but the festive spirit was a hollow echo, drowned by the weight of Simeon Lee's brutal murder. The grand dining room, adorned with wreaths of holly and flickering candles, felt more like a mausoleum than a place of celebration. The family sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces taut with suspicion, their forced civility fraying like a threadbare tapestry. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in his tailored suit despite the late hour of the previous night's interrogations, stood at the head of the room, his piercing gaze sweeping over the assembled company. His small, precise hands clasped behind his back, he exuded an air of calm authority, though his mind churned with the intricate puzzle of the Locktrue murder. The morning had begun with a strained attempt at normalcy. Lydia, Alfred's poised and perceptive wife, had insisted on serving a traditional Christmas breakfast, as if the ritual could stitch together the family's fractured bonds. The clink of silver against porcelain was the only sound as the family, ate or rather, pushed food around their plates. Alfred, his brow furrowed with worry, kept his eyes fixed on his untouched eggs. Harry, the prodigal son, sprawled in his chair with a forced nonchalance, though his fingers drummed restlessly on the table. George, ever the politician, muttered about the inconvenience of the police presence, while his wife, Magdalen, toyed with her pearls, her lips pursed in silent disdain. David, the artistic son, stared into the distance, his face a mask of suppressed rage, while his wife, Hilda, gently touched his arm, her quiet strength a contrast to his volatility. Pilar Estravados, Simeon's enigmatic granddaughter, sat with a feline grace, her dark eyes darting between her uncles, her expression unreadable. Stephen Farr, the outsider, leaned back in his chair, his sharp features betraying nothing, though his presence seemed to unsettle the others like a shadow cast by an unseen light. Poirot cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the oppressive silence like a blade. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice soft yet commanding, "we gather today not to celebrate, but to confront the truth. The death of Monsieur Simeon Lee was no mere act of violence, it was a performance, a masquerade designed to deceive. Today, Hercule Poirot will lift the veil of deception and reveal the threads that bind this crime together." The family stirred, exchanging uneasy glances. Harry snorted, breaking the tension. "A performance? Really, Poirot, you make it sound like we're in one of David's blasted plays." David's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "Don't drag me into this, Harry. You're the one who's always playing the fool." "Enough." Lydia's voice, sharp and clear, silenced the brothers. "Monsieur Poirot, please, go on. We're all eager to hear what you've uncovered." Her tone was polite, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of dread. Poirot inclined his head, acknowledging her request. "Merci, Madame Lee. Let us begin with a revelation that has troubled me since last night. The diamond, the single, glittering stone found in Simeon Lee's room, holds a significance that goes beyond mere theft. Monsieur Lee, I have learned, intended to bequeath this diamond to Mademoiselle Pilar." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Pilar's eyes widened, though whether in genuine surprise or calculated performance, Poirot could not yet determine. Alfred's fork clattered to his plate. "To Pilar," he said, his voice tight. "But why? She's barely been here." "Weak." George's face reddened. "That's preposterous. Father would never favor a stranger over his own sons." Pilar's lips curved into a faint, defiant smile. "I am not a stranger, Uncle George. I am his granddaughter. Perhaps he saw in me something worth rewarding." "Worth rewarding?" Harry scoffed, leaning forward. "You mean worth manipulating? The old man loved his games, didn't he? Pitting us against each other like dogs scrabbling for scraps." "Harry, please," Hilda interjected softly, her voice a soothing balm. "Let Monsieur Poirot explain." Poirot raised a hand, reclaiming control. "The diamond, Mies Amos, was not merely a gift. It was a provocation. Simeon Lee knew that its announcement would ignite tensions, expose jealousies, and perhaps draw out the one who harbored the deepest grudge, and so it has. But let us turn to another matter, the crash that preceded the scream, the theatrical chaos that masked the murder. He paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking on the parquet floor. The overturned furniture, the shattered vase, the scattered papers, all suggested a struggle. But Hercule Poirot does not accept appearances at face value. Last night, I returned to the scene of the crime with Superintendent Dan. There, in the shadow of the great oak desk, I found something most curious, a small mechanical device, cunningly concealed within a hollowed-out book. He produced the object from his pocket, a small, spring-loaded contraption, no larger than a matchbox, its gears glinting in the candlelight. The family leaned forward, their curiosity overriding their unease. "What the devil is that?" George demanded, squinting at the device. "A noisemaker," Poirot replied, his tone almost playful. "A simple mechanism, designed to release a loud crash when triggered. It was placed to fall at a precise moment, creating the illusion of a violent struggle. The scream we heard, Monsieur Lee's final cry, was not caused by the furniture's collapse, but by the act of murder itself." Stephen Farr's eyes narrowed. "So you're saying the whole scene was staged? The locked door, the massole of it?" "Precisement," Poirot said, his mustache twitching with satisfaction. "The killer wished us to believe in a chaotic struggle, an intruder perhaps, or a moment of passion. But the truth is far colder, far more calculated. The locked door was not locked at all, not in the way we were meant to think." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling like the snow outside. Lydia's hand tightened around her napkin. "But how?" "The door was bolted from the inside. We all saw it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A clever trick, madame." "The bolt was manipulated not by a key, but by a thread. A fine wire pulled through a tiny hole in the doorframe, so small it escaped notice. This wire, attached to the bolt, was pulled from the outside, locking the door after the killer departed. The wire was then withdrawn, leaving no trace." David leaned forward, his voice low. "You mean someone went to all that trouble just to make it look impossible?" "Oui, Monsieur David. The impossible crime is the most seductive to the criminal mind, for it promises immunity. But no crime is impossible to Hercule Poirot." The family exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of awe and fear. Pilar's voice broke the silence, her accent lending her words an exotic lilt. "But who, Monsieur Poirot? Who would go to such lengths?" Poirot's gaze lingered on her, assessing. "That, mademoiselle, is the question we must now pursue. But first, let us consider another clue, one that has whispered to me since the night of the murder. A servant, Tressilian's young assistant, Horbury, reported seeing a shadow move in the corridor before the scream. Not a person, but a shadow, fleeting and indistinct. This shadow, I believe, was no ghost, but a reflection of the killer's presence, caught in the flicker of a candle or the gleam of a mirror." Horbury, standing nervously by the door, flushed under Poirot's scrutiny. I didn't see much, sir. Just a flicker, like someone moving quick-like." Poirot nodded. "And yet, Horbury, your observation is most valuable, for it tells us the killer was in motion, perhaps preparing their final act. But let us return to the diamond, for it is the key to the heart of this deception." He turned to Pilar, his voice gentle but probing. "Mademoiselle Estravados, you arrived at Gorston Hall only days ago. Yet your grandfather placed great trust in you, so he wished us to believe. Tell me, did he confide in you about this diamond?" Pilar's eyes met his, unflinching. "He spoke of it once, yes. He said it was a treasure from his past, a symbol of his power. He said it would be mine, to remind me of my heritage." "And did he speak of enemies?" Poirot pressed. "Of those who might resent such a gift?" Pilar hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of her sleeve. "He said there were those who would hate me for it, but he didn't name them." Harry laughed bitterly. "Oh, come off it, Pilar. You expect us to believe you're innocent in all this. You show up out of nowhere, and suddenly father's rewriting his will for you." "Harry," Hilda's voice was sharp, her eyes flashing. "You have no right to accuse her. We're all under suspicion here." "Indeed," Poirot said, raising a hand to quell the rising tempers. "But let us consider the diamond's true purpose. It was not merely a gift, nor a theft. It was a lure, a bait to draw out the killer's motive." Simeon Lee, in his final days, played a dangerous game. He knew his family's weaknesses: greed, resentment, pride. He dangled the diamond before them, knowing it would stir their darkest impulses. Alfred's voice trembled as he spoke. "You're saying father wanted this, that he provoked his own murder?" Poirot's expression softened, but only slightly. "Not precisely, Monsieur Alfred, but he created the conditions for it. He wished to see who among you would crack under the pressure of his manipulations, and one of you did." The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with unspoken accusations. George's face was ashen, his hands clenched into fists. "This is outrageous. You're accusing us all, Poirot, without proof." "Proof, Monsieur George, is what I seek," Poirot replied smoothly, "and I have found it, piece by piece. The diamond, the noisemaker, the wire, the shadow, all are threads in a tapestry of deception. But there is one more thread, one final clue that binds them all." He paused, letting the tension build. The family leaned forward, their breaths held, as if the very air might shatter with his next words. "In Simeon Lee's desk," Poirot continued, "I found a note, written in his hand. It was not addressed to any of you, but to himself, a reminder, perhaps, of his own sins. It read, 'The past is never buried. It waits.'" David's eyes widened, his voice barely a whisper. "The past, mother." Poirot's gaze flicked to him, sharp and unyielding. "Oui, Monsieur David, the past, your mother, whose memory haunts this house. Your father's cruelty to her, his betrayals, his manipulations, they are the roots of this crime. But whose hand wielded the blade? That is the question we must answer." The room erupted into chaos. George shouted, accusing Harry of greed. Harry fired back, blaming Alfred's blind loyalty. Pilar's voice rose above the din, fierce and defiant, insisting she had no part in the murder. Stephen remained silent, his eyes locked on Poirot, as if measuring his every word. Poirot raised both hands, his voice cutting through the clamor like a gavel. "Silence. We will not descend into chaos. The truth is close, Mies, Amos, closer than you think. The killer is among us, and their deception is unraveling. The diamond, the locked door, the staged struggle all point to a mind that is cunning, but not infallible." Hercule Poirot seized through the veil. He turned to Tressilian, who stood quietly by the door, his aged face etched with exhaustion. "Tressilian, you have served this family for decades. You knew Simeon Lee better than most. Tell me, did he ever speak of a secret, something he feared might return to haunt him?" Tressilian hesitated, his hands trembling slightly. He was a hard man, sir, but yes, in his last days, he spoke of mistakes, of debts unpaid. He said once, "The sins of the father will find him out." I thought he meant his sons, but now, I'm not so sure. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The pieces were falling into place, the pattern emerging like a mosaic beneath a layer of dust. The diamond, the note, the shadow, the noisemaker, all were parts of a grand illusion, designed to obscure the truth. But the truth, as Poirot knew, could not be hidden forever. As the family dispersed, their nerves frayed and their suspicions, raw Poirot retreated to the library, where he sat by the fire, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames. The killer had played their hand well, but they had underestimated Hercule Poirot. The final unmasking was near, and with it, the end of the masquerade. Chapter 10. The final unmasking. The snow fell in relentless curtains beyond the toll. Frost-etched windows of Gorston Hall's grand library, where the air was thick with the scent of old leather, polished oak, and the bitter undercurrent of betrayal. The room, vast and dimly lit by a roaring fire in the hearth, seemed to hold its breath. The towering bookshelves, laden with volumes of forgotten lore, loomed like silent witnesses to the drama about to unfold. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, precise figure a stark contrast to the opulence around him. His black patent leather shoes gleamed in the firelight, and his moustache, perfectly waxed, twitched faintly as he surveyed the assembled company. The family, Alfred, Harry, George, David, their wives, Pilar, and Stephen sat in a semicircle of her backed chairs, their faces a gallery of unease, defiance, and barely concealed fear. Superintendent Sugden stood by the door, his notebook at the ready, while Colonel Johnson, Poirot's old friend, leaned against a bookshelf, his expression one of grim anticipation. Poirot's eyes, sharp and unyielding, swept over the group. "Mies Amis," he began, his voice soft yet commanding, slicing through the crackle of the fire. We have gathered here, in this place of knowledge, to bring light to the darkness that has fallen upon Gorston Hall. A man is dead, Simeon Lee, patriarch, provocateur, and, to some, a tormentor. His life was taken not by chance, but by design. A design most cunning, most theatrical, and most cruel. Tonight, Hercule Poirot shall unmask the one who committed this crime. A murmur rippled through the room. Lydia, Alfred's wife, clutched her shawl tighter, her knuckles white. Harry, sprawled in his chair with an air of forced nonchalance, lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his sharp features. George shifted uncomfortably, his wife Hilda gripping his arm as if to anchor him. David, pale and haunted, stared at the floor, while Pilar's dark eyes glittered with an unreadable intensity. Stephen Farr, the outsider, stood apart, his lean frame taut, his gaze fixed on Poirot as if weighing every word. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and began to pace, his steps measured, deliberate. "Let us begin with the scene of the crime," he said. A locked room, a scream, a crash of furniture, and a man with his throat cut, lying in a pool of his own blood. No footprints in the snow outside, no sign of an intruder. A puzzle, none. But Hercule Poirot does not believe in the impossible. The locked room was not locked by magic, but by method. He paused, letting the silence stretch, heavy with expectation. The door was bolted from within, yet the murderer was not in the room when we entered. How, then, was this done? The answer lies in the hidden passage, a narrow corridor used by servants, concealed behind the panel in Simeon Lee's room. But this passage, it is too small for the heavy furniture that was overturned. The crash, Mies Amos, was not the result of a struggle. It was a performance, a device, rigged to create noise, to distract, to make us believe in chaos where there was precision. Alfred leaned forward, his voice tight. But who? Poirot. Who would go to such lengths? And why? Poirot raised a finger. Patience, Monsieur Alfred. To understand the who, we must first understand the why. Simeon Lee was a man who played with the lives of others as if they were pieces on a chessboard. His wealth, his diamonds, his promises, they were tools of manipulation. He summoned you all here, not for a joyful Christmas, but to stir the pot of your resentments. He spoke of changing his will, of bequeathing a diamond to Mademoiselle Pilar, of revisiting old debts with Monsieur Farr's father. He wanted you to fight, to fear, to reveal yourselves. Pilar's lips parted, her voice low and fierce. He was my grandfather. He cared for me. He would not have hurt me. Poirot turned to her, his eyes softening but not wavering. Mademoiselle, your grandfather cared for control. The diamond he promised you was real, yes, but it was also a lure, a way to provoke his sons, and provoke them he did. Each of you had a reason to wish him gone. Alfred, your loyalty was mocked. Harry, your return was met with scorn. George, your greed was baited. David, your pain was rekindled. And you, Monsieur Farr, carried the weight of your father's betrayal. Stephen's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his silence louder than words. Poirot continued, his voice rising slightly, a conductor building to a crescendo. But let us return to the crime. The bloodstains. They told a story. They were not random, not the result of a frenzied attack. They formed a pattern, deliberate, controlled, and there was a smell of faint chemical odor, almost lost in the chaos. This was no ordinary murder. It was a tableau, staged to deceive. He stopped pacing and faced the family, his gaze piercing. The killer used the hidden passage to enter, an exit, but the locked door. That was the genius. A simple mechanism, a thread, perhaps, or a fine wire pulled through a crack to slide the bolt after the deed was done. The noise-making device, hidden among the furniture, was triggered to create the illusion of a struggle. And the diamonds, they were never stolen. They were in the safe all along, untouched, because this murder was not about greed. A gasp escaped. Lydia, not about greed. Then what? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Vengeance, madame, vengeance for a wound that festered for years, a betrayal buried in the past but never forgotten. He turned to David, whose hands were clenched, his face a mask of anguish. Monsieur David, you spoke of your mother, of the cruelty she endured at your father's hands. You said you could never forgive him. Your pain, it is real, but it is not the whole story. David's head snapped up, his voice hoarse. What are you saying, Poirot? Poirot held up a hand. I am saying that the truth lies not in what was said, but in what was hidden. Let us consider the note found in Simeon's desk, a cryptic scroll. The past returns to claim its due. What did it mean? And then there was the shadow, seen by a servant, moving before the scream. A shadow that did not belong. He turned to the group, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The killer is among us. The killer is one who knew the house, its secrets, its passages. One who hated Simeon Lee, not for his money, but for what he took from them long ago. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across the room. Poirot's gaze settled on Hilda, George's wife, whose calm demeanor had been a quiet presence throughout the investigation. Her hands, folded neatly in her lap, trembled slightly. Madame Hilda, Poirot said softly, "You have been the silent one, the observer, but Hercule Poirot sees what others do not. You are not what you seem." Hilda's eyes widened, but her voice was steady. "I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot smiled, a small, sad smile. "Oh, but you do. Let us tell a story, shall we? A story of a young woman, wronged many years ago. A woman who loved a man who worked for Simeon Lee in the diamond fields of South Africa. A man who was promised a share of the wealth, but who was betrayed, left with nothing. That man was Stephen Farr's father, but he was not alone in his ruin. There was another, a woman who loved him, who bore his child, who vowed to see justice done." The room was deathly still. Hilda's face paled, but she did not speak. Poirot continued, relentless. "You, Madame Hilda, are that woman. You were not always Hilda Lee. You were once Hilda Grayson, companion to Stephen Farr's father. When Simeon betrayed him, he took everything: your future, your love, your hope. You married George Lee, perhaps to stay close to the family, to watch, to wait. And when Simeon summoned you all here, taunting you with his diamonds and his will, you saw your chance." George sputtered. "This is absurd. Hilda, tell him." But Hilda's eyes were locked on Poirot's, and in them was a flicker of something: defiance, perhaps, or relief. Poirot pressed on. "You knew the hidden passage from your years in this house. You entered Simeon's room, confronted him, and when he laughed at your pain, you struck. The knife was quick, precise. You staged the scene, the overturned furniture, the rigged device to make the crash, the thread to lock the door, the chemical odor, a touch of cleaning fluid, used to wipe the blade, to obscure any trace, the bloodstains carefully arranged to suggest a struggle. It was a masterpiece of deception." Hilda's voice, when it came, was low, almost a whisper. "You have no proof." Poirot reached into his pocket and produced a small, torn piece of fabric, the one found near the window. "This, madame, is from your shawl, caught as you moved through the passage, and the note in Simeon's desk. It was not his writing. It was yours, a final taunt to the man who ruined you." The room erupted. George leaped to his feet, shouting, "Hilda, is this true?" Alfred's face was ashen. Lydia's hand flew to her mouth, and Pilar's eyes blazed with a mix of shock and admiration. Stephen Farr stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Is it true, Hilda? Did you know my father?" Hilda rose, her composure cracking like ice underfoot. "Yes," she said, her voice steady now, resonant with years of buried pain. "I loved him. Simeon destroyed him, took everything. He laughed when I begged for mercy, all those years ago. And this Christmas, he laughed again. I could not let him win." Superintendent Sugden stepped forward, his voice firm. "Mrs. Lee, you'll need to come with me." Hilda nodded, almost serene, as if a weight had been lifted. "I am ready." Poirot watched as Sugden led her from the room, the family staring in stunned silence. Colonel Johnson approached, clapping Poirot on the shoulder. "Remarkable, Poirot. How did you know?" Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. "The little grey cells, mon ami. They see what the heart hides. The pattern of the blood, the note, the fabric. They spoke to me." And Hilda's silence, her calm, it was the silence of one who had already won. As the family dispersed, their voices a low hum of shock and grief, Poirot walked to the window, gazing out at the snow. The diamonds, recovered from the safe, glittered in their case, untouched by the tragedy. The mystery was solved, the killer unmasked, but the victory was bittersweet. Christmas at Gorston Hall had been marred by greed, by vengeance, by the ghosts of the past. Poirot turned from the window, his coat buttoned against the cold. "Come, Johnson," he said softly. "It is time to leave this place. The snow falls, and Hercule Poirot has no more to do here." And with that, he stepped into the night, leaving behind a house forever changed, the echoes of a festive fatality fading into the winter's embrace.